for the state. And when an independent agency like Orissa Economics Association prepares, we can have say critical evaluation of the past, and similarly we can also give very good suggestions to the government in the coming years. At least we have 15 years. What are the things we can achieve when Odisha becomes 100 years old? So in that context, we started discussing with some people, basically for funding, because it also needs money. And we have approached a few agencies, and we have got some assurance that we'll get some money for this also. So with that kind of verbal assurance from different sources, we have started this initiative. We had in fact earlier planned to do this consultation meeting in physical mode, and it should have been actually a public consultation meeting where we had planned to invite basically people from political parties, bureaucracy, academia, NGO, then media, basically people from all fields. But we did not get permission from the Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation because of the rising COVID cases. That's how we dropped that public consultation meeting. And now we are having this meeting only among the life members of the association. Of course, there are no special invitees actually who have joined with us, but then mostly it is among the life members. But at a later date, when COVID situation improves, we will also have a proper public consultation meeting because we don't want to make this document merely an academic document. It should be widely acceptable. So we should take the perspective from people from all disciplines, basically from all fields. So that is basically our approach. Now I have shared with all of you the chapter outline, basically the tentative chapter outline. We had a couple of us actually had met twice or thrice, and we have basically to name also Professor Keshab Das, Professor Udaya Mishra, and Professor Deepak Mishra. And we actually interacted twice, and then we have prepared this draft outline. And we thought actually we should take the opinion of all the life members so that if we have missed out anything, that can be incorporated. And so once we finalize the chapters, like what's sort of the content of the report, then we can finalize the writers. So that would be our second step. That today we'll finalize the outline of the report, basically the content of the report, and after that we'll select the writers. Then if COVID situation permits, we'll again go for a public consultation meeting where we'll invite people from all walks of life, and then the writers will start. We'll have a writers workshop also. Once we finalize the writers, we'll have a proper writers meeting where we'll discuss in details like what all things should be written and what should be the approach, how much, like what should be the length of the report, in each chapter what all things should be there. So that will happen at a later date. Then writers will start, and then we will have also 4 regional consultation meetings. Basically, since there are regional issues in the state, particularly to capture the regional disparity and regional aspirations, we have planned to have 4 regional meetings, at least one in Koraput, one in Sambalpur or Balangir, and then one in Baripada or Baleshwar, and one in Bhubaneswar. So that's how we'll have 4 regional consultation meetings where we'll also invite the people from that region to basically know their demands, and so that we also reflect those demands in the vision document. And once we prepare this, so that is basically a 1-year plan, and at the end of this year, basically we'll have another writers workshop where we'll have a tentative report, basically first draft of the report, where that will be a closed door meeting among the writers, and that will take feedback, and then we'll revise the chapter, and then we'll go for a public release of the report finally. That will be again a public event where we'll invite people from different walks of life. So this is the plan that we have made for the report, Odisha Vision 2036. And now I will not take much time. Now I will invite, I should thank all the speakers today who have agreed to speak, and especially Professor Prabhat Patnaik. In fact, he is not keeping well. He has serious back pain. He is going through physiotherapy and all. So, but he has agreed actually to spend some time with us to give his views on this. And I also thank Professor Pulin Nayak and I know again all the authors actually, basically all the speakers actually who are going to speak. And I must clarify that today we are only taking the opinion, so we have not decided the writers. That will be decided at a later date. So with this brief introduction, I welcome all of you, and I also thank all of you for joining with us to share your views. And with this, now I invite the President of the Orissa Economics Association, Professor Surjya Narayan Tripathy, who is basically the former professor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. Now Professor Surjya Narayan Tripathy will basically address all of us. So it is over to Professor Surjya Narayan Tripathy.
Distinguished members of Orissa Economics Association, I really congratulate all of you to this consulting meeting, Odisha Vision 2036. Wherever we are, the Oriya speaking people or Oriya people, we have our heart to our mother land, mother state Odisha. So we have our concern, we have our feelings for the development of our own state, and that has been reflected by your active participation and your involvement to this vision document preparation. And in this context, really, I am grateful to all of you because you are here and you are willing to cooperate to extend your participation for the preparation of vision document 2036. We know that Odisha attained its political identity as a province of India on 1st April 1936. Much before the state's formation, Odisha had internationally acclaimed as a maritime trader, and it has trade with the South Asian countries. It has its glorious past. There is no out of doubt on this point. To ensure a holistic development of state, by 2036, the 100th year of Odisha's formation, Odisha's vision 2036 need to be documented. The state need to identify districts, map their baseline of their economy, and work on increasing economic output. So the vision statement must take into cognizance of the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, and threats that loom large on the development horizon of Odisha. The vision document attempts, and it must prefer the anticipated picture of Orissa in 2036. It must unfold the prospective futuristic plan and how can we attain the position in the Indian map by 2036. The proposed Odisha vision document will be a detailed report briefing the background of from the historical perspective on the performance of Odishan economy during the previous decades, future challenges, and the way forward. The proposed document puts the perspective in economic condition of Odisha and analyzes the trends and prospects of its diversified sectors, agriculture, industry, natural resources, environment, employment, power, television, so on and so forth. So, in this context, I invite and I request academicians and administrators of Orissa and outside the state of Orissa to articulate their views and share their opinions and strategies spanning on extensive range of themes to explore different dimensions of economic aspects of preparation and prospective vision for 2036 and transfer the vision into action at the grassroots level. So this consulting meeting regarding the Odisha Vision 2036 is to have some ideas to have the bare outline of the roadmap we are going to prepare for future. And with this, I invite the authors, the academicians, the distinguished persons to share your views for the 2036 Odisha Vision. Thank you all. Over to Amarendra.
Thank you, Professor Tripathy, for your inspiring words. Now, I will invite Professor Prabhat Patnaik to basically share his views on this report. I think I need not introduce Professor Prabhat Patnaik. All of us know Professor Prabhat Patnaik very well, and so I'll not spend any time actually in introducing Professor Prabhat Patnaik. Now, it's over to you, sir.
যেহেতু অমরেন্দ্র বাবু মোর নাটা লিখি ଦେଇଥିଲେ among the list of speakers, ମୁଁ ଆଉ ନାହିଁ କରିପାରିଲିନି। ମୁଁ ରିପୋର୍ଟ ଉପରେ ତ କହିବା ତୁଳନାରେ ବରଂ ମୁଁ ଟିକେ generally about economic problems, I'll provide some inputs. এই COVID-19 ର କ୍ରାଇସିସ୍ ଟାକୁ ଛାଡ଼ିଦେଲେ ଆଗରୁ ମଧ୍ୟ ଆମେ ଜାଣିଛୁ that the basic problem which was afflicting the Indian economy, and Odisha is no exception, was the problem of mass unemployment. We know that even before the COVID, the unemployment rate in the country was higher than it had ever been in the previous 45 years. And now, all over, elections are taking place. Everywhere you find that really the burning issue is one of unemployment. Now, this unemployment issue is even more serious than we generally believe, because of the fact that there's a drastic fall in women's participation rate in the workforce. Now, whenever unemployment is high, there's a discouraged worker effect, because of which a lot of people drop out of the workforce, and this is particularly true of women workers. So the decline in women's participation rate is something which is really a symptom of unemployment, but it is not counted as unemployment. So when you look at both these aspects, the immediate problem before the state is one of finding sufficient jobs for large numbers of people, for women, for rural women, and of course, for the educated youth. Now, whenever there is a problem of unemployment, the typical belief is that we must therefore diversify the economy to create more jobs. In particular, we should industrialize, which is, of course, without exception, absolutely correct. Of course, one has to diversify the structure of the economy. We move out of excessive dependence on the workforce on agriculture. As you know, in India, the proportion of the workforce in agriculture has not really declined, despite all these high rates of growth that you have been having in the economy, including in the neoliberal period. But for that, generally, it is considered that what is necessary is to really invite big ticket investment, that we must have large projects and therefore invite big capitalists to undertake investments. Now, here I would like to make a suggestion, namely that large-scale projects, large-scale industry has never, nowhere in the world, been a solution to the problem of unemployment. The amount of employment generated in large-scale industry is really very small, and this is true when you take into account upstream, downstream job creation. Everything taken together, you still find that large-scale industry is no panacea for the problem of unemployment. And there is a complete misreading of European industrialization experience. There is a belief that in Europe, a lot of people who were generally unemployed because of the enclosure movement, who used to be the beneficiaries of those poor laws, which had been enacted to provide some help to those who were vagabonds or jobless, that they were all eventually absorbed through capitalist industrialization. That's a complete misreading of European industrialization experience. In fact, in Europe, the job market got tightened not because of the provision of employment by large-scale capitalist industry, but because of mass migration to the temperate regions of white settlement like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. According to W. Arthur Lewis, development economist, economic historian, 50 million Europeans migrated to the temperate regions of white settlement in the period after the end of the Napoleonic Wars until the First World War. So the point now, we cannot really have that kind of migration open to us. If our people migrated on that scale, by the way, for England, the calculation is that every year, half the increase in population just migrated out of the country. I'm not saying newborn babies, but I mean the number of people who migrated out were roughly half the increase in population. Now, if we had that scale of migration, then since independence, we should have had about 40 crores of people migrating out of India. And the point is that kind of space does not exist, so that kind of migration possibility does not exist. And large-scale industry is not something that's going to solve the employment problem. Now, that is not to say we should not have large-scale industry. Of course, we need the products of large-scale industry. We must have large-scale industry. But that is not going to solve the problem of unemployment, which is a burning social problem, really burning social problem. And therefore, we have to think in terms of industrialization, but in a more diversified manner. For instance, if large-scale industry is really, while we must have large-scale industry, but on the other hand, we have to encourage small-scale industry, diversified industry, and so on. Now, if so, then of course, we have to have a lot of people to set up these industrial units. Now, you may say, where do we find these entrepreneurs and so on? But here I would make the suggestion that we can actually have, for instance, panchayats setting up enterprises. In China, they had township and village enterprises, which were really owned by the township committee. They're not owned by any private capitalists, large or small. So we could actually experiment in terms of panchayat enterprises, where once we have a strong system of panchayats, and we must have, if we are talking about Orissa 100 years from its formation, then one of the things that Orissa must aim to have is really decentralized planning and decentralized administration. And if so, then one of the things we can have is really panchayat enterprises. Now, panchayat enterprises have then got to be supplemented by enterprises which can be, first we must have big ticket private investment. Secondly, we must have big ticket public investment. If private investment is not forthcoming, but we need to have large scale industry, then the public sector, the government sector must step in. Thirdly, as I said, we have to think in terms of panchayat enterprises on the lines of the township and village enterprises in China. Fourthly, we could think in terms of private, dispersed, small entrepreneurs setting up units and so on. Fifthly, I would like to bring to your notice something which has happened in Kerala. I used to work in Kerala for 5 years, so I got some direct experience of it. In Kerala, the state government helped destitute women to set up self-help groups. It's a sort of cooperative, and that was called Kudumbashri. That basically there are Kudumbashri units which are there all over the state, which have been set up with the help of the state government, with financial assistance from the self-government. But Kudumbashree groups actually run innumerable enterprises all over the state. They run into a restaurant, they run, now they have even moved into agriculture, because Kerala has a law that you cannot have paddy land lying fallow. If the paddy land is lying fallow, then the district collector takes over the land and gives it to somebody to cultivate, and then gives a rent to the owner, to the absentee owner. Okay, the rent is fixed by the district collector. Now, typically, all such land is now being cultivated by this Kudumbashree, the self-help, destitute women's group, and it brings about an enormous increase in the living standards of the women's groups. In addition, what it does is that, it has a larger multiplier effect. I mean, suppose you have a restaurant which is owned by a private person who makes a lot of profit out of it, then the multiplier effect of that would be much less than the multiplier effect of a restaurant that is actually owned and managed and operated by these self-help groups. So you can have, as it were, a large number of different patterns of enterprises in this industrialization project. And of course, the panchayat enterprises I'm talking about can also be involved in value addition in agriculture. Orissa is not like the Bimaru states. Orissa has got an agricultural output that's fairly healthy and robust. Per capita agricultural output, per capita food grain output in Orissa is really quite impressive. And therefore, you can actually have value addition at the village level to agricultural products. And you can have enterprises set up for that purpose, owned by the panchayats themselves. And then one can think in terms of cooperative enterprises and traditional crafts, where we do have cooperatives anyway. We have a fairly large number of cooperatives in traditional industries. One could think in terms of cooperative enterprise. So you can have 5 or 6 different kinds of enterprises which can all be used to diversify the production structure. The second and very important area for diversification is, of course, that even to have this diversification, you need a certain amount of education and, of course, healthcare. In other words, Odisha must spend an enormous amount on education, even to have a diversified industrial structure. And what is more, it must also spend on healthcare. Now, what is more, education and healthcare, or what is called the care economy. The care economy is extremely employment generating. As a matter of fact, in Sweden, for instance, Scandinavian countries, 10% of the workforce is employed in the care economy, in the provision of care. In fact, of late, as Amarendra told you, I've been having this back pain. So I've got a physiotherapist who comes to visit me. And physiotherapy is one of those things, not very easy to get hold of a good physiotherapist. So in India, the care economy is much less developed than elsewhere. And certainly it provides immense scope for employment generation. So industrialization, care economy, and education itself is something that would provide scope for employment generation, teachers, buildings to be built, and so on, because of which, again, you have a lot of employment. By the way, construction is highly employment intensive. So we have possibilities of diversification of the economy in these ways, which we must never in any vision document, we must take cognizance of it. On this set of topics, I'd just like to make one small point, and that is the following. That you see, one of the things that we have, which is extremely unimpressive in India, is that we are very poor in designing. I mean, our designs are very poor. You pour tea from a teapot and half the tea is falling on the table. In other words, I mean, really, it is quite amazing how, you see, it's one thing. Say in Odisha, if you take the traditional Sambalpuri sari or something, that's fine. Traditional designs have been handed down, and of course, on the basis of those designs, the craftsmen, the artisans are excellent in producing saris or products or so. But new design, particularly in the newer commodities, the kind of designing ability we have is extremely poor. Now, that being the case, I believe it's extremely important in a state like Orissa to have an institute of design. And I think that is something that can actually provide a facility for this kind of industrialization, which I'm talking about. In other words, they would be able to help people with designing new kinds of products. Now, of course, the question that would immediately arise is, where are the resources for this? I believe Pulin is going to be talking about it in a little while, so I don't want to spend too much on the resource question. I'll just make one or two comments and I'll move on. Now, the first thing to note is that, that, okay, the resources for the states have become really pretty desperate, particularly because of the movement to GST. And this movement to GST has left the states high and dry, because there was a promise that you would get GST compensation. But on the other hand, now we know there is no GST compensation. On the other hand, the center was actually trying to pass off a part of defense expenditure onto the shoulders of the state government, saying that defense, after all, is a national question. But defense in the 7th schedule of the Constitution really belongs to the center. So you cannot really pass it on to the states when the states themselves are starved of funds. So we all know, and I'm sure Pulin would be talking about it. We all know that currently all the state governments in particular are facing an acute fiscal crisis. Now, if so, then where are the resources for all this? Here, I would just suggest two things. I'm sure Pulin would make suggestions about resources, but I'd just like to suggest two things. The first thing is that a lot of this industrialization effort is something that must be offloaded from the budget. In other words, it must not be the case that the budget actually pays for all this, not at all. As a matter of fact, we can actually set up independent corporations. Those corporations can raise their own funds in the market. The government can underwrite their raising funds in the market. The government can step in case they run into a problem, a financial crisis or something. But on the other hand, that will just be, as it were, financing the gap, but not financing the whole lot. And so we can think in terms of independent corporations. For instance, the industrial corporation that Orissa has can actually, enlarge its scope in order to stimulate industrialization on a very wide scale and raise resources for this. Again, I'll give you an example from Kerala. One of the things that they have done, because of the fiscal crisis that the state government has, and Kerala's fiscal problem is far more acute than of Orissa. One of the things they have done is to actually set up an infrastructure development fund, which raises its own resources in the market, including in the foreign market, foreign meaning UAE and places like that, where there are lots of Malayalis. So we could think in terms of corporations which finance these kinds of activities, raising their funds in the market independently, with the state supporting them, with the state underwriting them, but the state not actually funding them. So as many projects as can be offloaded from the state budget, we should do that. The second thing, of course, is to have banks with which the producers, or if we are thinking in terms of industrial enterprises, these small industrial enterprises, they have to have a relationship with the banks. It's possible that the banks would not immediately finance them. It's possible that they would not actually say that, which bank in India is really The old days were different, but these days, no bank in India is really going to finance a large number of small enterprises. But on the other hand, we could again have some way in which a general corporation can be set up, which then borrows from the banks and in turn finances these small industrial enterprises. And what is more, also gives them technical help, because many of them would require technical assistance to produce viable project reports, to in fact visualize how exactly a project should be done, on what scale it should be done, how it should be financed, and so on. Now, on that, again, it would be a good idea if many of these enterprises actually take the help of knowledgeable people in that area who are retired people. Many retired people after retirement are really at a loose end. They have got enormous expertise, but on the other hand, that expertise is going to waste. They would be perfectly willing to actually help these enterprises come up, to give advice to them free of cost. In fact, in a particular area, suppose you're thinking to the panchayat enterprises, in that area of the panchayat, there would be people, there would be engineers, there would be accountants, there would be economists and so on, who would be willing to make their expertise available to the panchayat for giving this kind of help and so on. So on the basis of drawing resources, and that's also something which is very good in terms of 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 suggesting a cooperative form of existence. If my knowledge of economics can come to the help of some villagers in my area, or can come to the help in providing rural employment in my area, nothing would give me greater satisfaction than that. So I think we should tap these kinds of things, which in the standard economics discussions, we tend to miss out. So I would really suggest that actually, if we are thinking in terms of Odisha 2036, then I think we have to really think out of the box. In other words, really have a certain bold vision in which we draw upon all the goodness that exists in our society in order to make sure that in 2036, people can say, large numbers of people in Orissa, particularly we have a large tribal population, a large SC/ST population, they can say that yes, we are much better off, much happier today than when the state was formed in 1936, 100 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you have given a very clear roadmap and perspective to the Odisha Vision 2036 report, and many of them actually I think can transform the Odisha economy. Particularly, if I only name a few, like the Kerala model issues that we have talked, and then care economy, and then decentralized industrialization, and then infrastructure and funding agencies and so on. I think many things can be easily actually adopted, and panchayat industrialization, basically decentralized planning and industrialization. So, and it is always a pleasure to listen to any time actually, and I have no words to thank you, because in spite of your illness, you have joined with us. And no, in fact, I was, after I talked to you, I felt morally guilty that I sort of imposed on you in spite of your ill health. So I think, sir, thank you so much, sir. Please feel free to actually go and take rest, because I think it must be actually quite painful actually for you. When there is back pain, I can understand actually what would be going through. So thank you so much, sir. Yeah, please feel free. If you want to join with us, you can stay back. Otherwise, please go and take rest, sir. Namaskar, sir. Okay. Now I would invite Professor Pulin Nayak to share his views. And although I had written actually that Sir would talk about Odisha's economic history and fiscal aspects, but in general, Sir actually can speak. In fact, Sir, actually I meant when I say I wrote actually economic history, I basically meant that probably you might, as a senior person, you might have seen actually Odisha's transition, or say progress from say 1947 till date. So in fact, you can still share your experiences, like how Odisha has moved ahead, and yeah, it's over to you, Naisha.
Thank you, Amarendra, and thank you for inviting me for this. And let me begin by also acknowledging the very insightful words spoken by Prabhat just before me. And I'm in total agreement with his broad contours, especially when he talks about the industrialization aspect and the issue of unemployment, which I too feel is the key to Orissa's development. And this must be the core issue that we must focus on. That needs to be the case because even though we become a state in 1936, as early as that, and we are the first state to be on the basis of language. You know, Orissa is the first state that was formed on the principle of language, and later on, after the country's independence in the 50s, language becomes the issue on which other states get formed. But we were the very first. There's a history to it. Madhu Babu was the Madhusudan Das was Utkala Gauraba. He was the person who was consumed with this idea of integrating the disparately positioned areas and districts of Orissa from the 1880s and 1890s when he became active with his own profession as a lawyer and as an activist. So Orissa was initially with the Bengal presidency, and in 1912 Orissa becomes part of the Bihar and Orissa unit. And in each case there were problems with many distinct parts of Orissa, Odia speaking people, but they were in different administrations. Of course, the coastal districts were there in one form, but there was Sambalpur, which was part of the central provinces, and there was Ganjam, which was part of the Madras presidency. And all of this led to disparate positioning of the Odia-speaking peoples. And as we know, in places like Sambalpur, in the school education, we know that they had difficulty in retaining Odia as the language, and they were, in fact, there was a time at which Hindi becomes the language and so forth. And in the courts, Odia was not the language. Hindi and Persian and so forth, English were the languages, and this caused a lot of difficulty, and likewise in Ganjam too. So Madhu Babu was consumed with this idea of integrating the Odia speaking peoples, and in 1903, as we know, he forms the Utkal Sammilani, and he tirelessly works towards the formation of the Orissa state, which comes about in 1936. And in his effort, he left no stone unturned. He spoke to people, he canvassed, he wrote letters, telegrams, and so forth. All of this he did over years and years. And one of the sad facts was that, of course, he was not there to see the formation of the state in 1936. Madhu Babu passed away in 1934, just before the formation of the state of Orissa. And you know, the history of Orissa as a state being formed with language as the basis, it has a prior history also, because you know, in the school education system of Orissa in the, shall we say, 1860s and 1870s, in places like, in districts like Cuttack and Balasore and so forth, there were instances where some of the school inspectors, who typically were from Bengal, they were Bengalis, all the administration was under the East India Company. Main location was Calcutta, so there was a predominance of Bengali officials who were the school inspectors and so forth. And I think in 1870, there was a gentleman by the name Kantilal Bhattacharya. He was a teacher in the Baleswar Zilla school. He, in fact, wrote a book, Kantilal Bhattacharya. He wrote a book in 1870 saying that Oriya is not a Swatantra, separate language. Oriya at Swatantra Bhasha Noy. He wrote a book like that. This is referred to and written about by historians who look at the history of Oriya language. And he was not alone in holding this view. There were certain other officials who also held this view, and but for the intervention of a number of public-spirited individuals, Fakir Mohan Senapati was one of them, but there was support coming in from other individuals like John Beams and Ravenshaw also, who did believe that no, Oriya is in fact an independent language, and it must not be dropped, and there's no question of eliminating Oriya as the language of instruction at the school level. So all of that was there, and then on the basis of language, Orissa becomes a state in 1936. Now, when we think of this issue of Odisha Vision 2036, I think it's an excellent idea. We should all be thinking seriously and carefully about it. And when we look at where Orissa is today, we are at 2021, 15 years away from our 100 years. Everything considered, I think we have to agree that Orissa's position in the last, say, 70 years or so has not been particularly good in comparison to the other states of the Union. And for example, when you look at the poverty ratio, I think some of the recent numbers I was trying to look at, India, let's say around 22%. It all really depends on where exactly you have your poverty line, but India is somewhere around 22%. Orissa is around 33%. So our poverty ratio is definitely more than the all India average. Bihar is at 34%, just a little bit more than Orissa. Now, that should be no consolation for us that there is another state, a big state, which has a higher poverty ratio. That should be no consolation for us. Independently, we should be definitely thinking in terms of eradication of poverty. That should be a major goal, and that is related to the issue of unemployment and so forth. And I'll be just coming to it. On the issue of unemployment, as Prabhat just mentioned, in the last 45 years, we've had possibly the highest rate of unemployment. And of course, it has been worsened by the COVID calamity. But again, looking at the numbers, there are no official numbers available, but I was just trying to look at the latest numbers from CMIE. All India unemployment figure, including both urban and rural areas, figure is somewhere around 23.5%. Orissa is 23.8%, more or less the average unemployment figure. Again, there are states with higher unemployment figures. Jharkhand 47%, Bihar 46%, Puducherry 75%. These are extraordinarily high figures of unemployment. And again, it should be no consolation that we are below that number in Orissa. We have to independently think in terms of increasing our employment potential. So I think if there is one clear thing we should be thinking in terms of for our vision document 2036, it has to be a complete elimination of the unemployment issue. And I think some of you will recall that even in the writings of some of our greatest epochal leaders, people like Gandhi, Gandhiji was not an economist, but in 1909 when he wrote his Hind Swaraj, it is the problem of unemployment that really hits him the most. He was always concerned with this issue of how to eliminate this, this problem so that every able-bodied person is employed. And that should be the target that we should be aiming for. Now, in the vision document, obviously, the important elements have to be the following. Orissa continues to be an agriculture centric state. And for the development of the state at large, we have to do whatever is the maximum possible for agriculture. There's no question about it. There is reason to believe that if you look at the numbers for investment in rural infrastructure, that number seems to have gone down in the last, say, 20 to 30 years. So a careful look at the numbers, official numbers, will establish that investment in rural infrastructure has been going down. So this is one clear area where one has to make a clear sort of emphasis for bringing rural infrastructure back into the main agenda, so that if rural infrastructure improves, then the possibilities of agriculture being more productive, that increases, and farmers are thereby benefited from that. Coming to industry, obviously agriculture has a very large section of the population continuing to be dependent on agriculture, and it has to be the case that there has to be a shift of labor from agriculture into industry. And I totally agree with what Prabhat just mentioned and talked about at length, and I will not elaborate, but I totally agree with the fact that thinking in terms of eliminating the unemployment problem with just big industry coming into Orissa is not the right way to go with the problem. Though we need not be against big industry entering into this state, but what is needed is that industrialization at a variety of levels. Of course, Prabhat also mentions the Panchayati Raj as an important element. I totally share this view also, but what I thought of was industries at a variety of levels, some medium level industries, small scale industries, industries to be sort of worked on by women of Orissa. And in all of this, there has to be an elaborate system of financing and elaborate system of offering of credit to the people who will be setting up these industries. Now, so we could be thinking in terms of small scale industries or medium level industries. I know that Keshab Babu is there, Keshab Das, and he may be talking about MSME. He's worked on this. But we have to find a way in which people in the rural areas are able to think in terms of, in addition to, they may well be in agriculture too, but in addition to agriculture, and not only having the charkha with them, which Gandhiji talked about, that can be there, but in addition to that, in addition to agriculture, they could be thinking in terms of their some traditional enterprise. Some of them could be weavers, some of them could now be thinking in terms of going into certain other kinds of enterprises, because after all, you know, time passes, and with time technology has come in. There is now the IT sector also. With electricity in the villages, you could think in terms of a degree of IT literate people in the village areas, making use of IT technology and relatively small amounts of finance, but setting up industries. And all of these industries need not necessarily require very large amounts of financial resources. They could be relatively small units. And the key idea is to generate employment. So I think industrialization needs to be looked at a variety of levels, and if that is something that Orissa is able to initiate, Orissa is just one of the states and relatively low placed among the Indian states. But if this is a kind of transformation Orissa is able to make in the next 15 years to the centenary of its formation in the year 2036, this may well be the template for the rest of the country, but somewhere a beginning has to be made. The rest of the country is also wallowing in a fairly large degree of unemployment and so forth. Maybe if this whole enterprise may be taken up in the right kind of spirit, with the idea of industrialization seeping into the rural economy as well. It's not necessary that rural economy necessarily has to be an agricultural economy. Of course, agriculture has to be there, but for absorbing labor, you have to think in terms of opening up into other possible industrial enterprises, and that is something that Orissa can think towards, work towards, and if it gives something like a possible template or even a successful template, that will be something extraordinary and fantastic. But we don't know how exactly it will go, but at least an effort needs to be made. The next question, again, Prabhat, I had thought of mentioning this, but Prabhat has already talked about it, education and health. The only thing I would mention in addition here is that on education and health, over the last 20 years or 25 years, it's very clear that if you see the attitude of the state government, they seem to have been in a mode of extracting away from the state sector in both these activities, education and health. And I believe this is the wrong thing to do. By all means, if you want, you can have some amount of private sector entry in the education as well as in the health sector. But I feel that these are the two key goods which are the merit goods, and there has to be a very strong presence of the government in both of these, both in terms of maintaining of the standards and so forth, which I think it's the state or the government which has to be there very much, because private sector management and engineering colleges, they have mushroomed all over the state, but we know that the quality has gone down the drain, and this is also true of many of the private schools. And when you come to health, it's a travesty of social reality that we have some of the top end hospitals where the per day room stay may be something like 40, 50, 60,000 rupees. It has no relation to where 95% of the country is. They can't dream of making an expenditure of that type. So it has to be a situation where the state has to have the driver's seat in both and health. Two or three things I just want to mention in the vision document for 2036. Obviously, the issue of resource gathering is very important. But as we already know, there is the issue of center-state financial relations. The GST was supposed to be a tax where the center collects the taxes and and shares it with the constituent states, but there have been problems in recent times. How precisely it is going to pan out, it's going to be another issue, but some fresh ways of taxation, I cannot think of it offhand, but obviously, in the literature, if we look at, there is talk of capital taxation. People who think in terms, India is one of the countries where, income inequality and wealth inequality has become very sharpened, and how precisely you raise resources, ultimately, maybe not today, but in the years to come, some way of tapping on capital, because a very tiny fraction of the population is sitting over very large amounts of wealth, and accounts for very large fraction of the income as well. So some form of capital taxation may also be thought of. How precisely, I am not elaborating or not saying anything, but that is something that one can think of. Finally, 1 or 2 points. Orissa has been a state, of course, with a rich cultural past and so forth, and a very, an approach which is very inclusive, has been this way for hundreds of years, but in recent times, there is reason to be worried about the nature of the social and political harmony, which we see in the country at large. But I think unless that is assured, anything like a systemic or sustainable economic growth cannot be assumed. So we must be careful about maintaining the social and political harmony, and in particular, the communal part is very important. Orissa has always been one of the states with the least kind of communal conflagrations, but in recent times, if you look at the last 10, 15, 20 years or a bit more, there have been worrisome events, and that needs to be firmly kept under check. And I think if the wisdom of the Oriya people is to be sort of looked at, I think we can expect that this could be a state which will provide a kind of sort of harmonious setting for the state to prosper, and that this could be a template for the rest of the country as well. Okay, I think these are basically my points. And again, the last point basically is that no majoritarianism to be predominant here. Everyone should have an equal say, and there should be all points of view should resonate in the social and the political sphere. So that should be the state, and there is a possibility that if Orissa is able to think along all of these lines, then maybe it can, something very substantial may be expected by 2036. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It is again a pleasure to listen to you, because whenever we have interacted over phone, you always talk about the past, like how things have started, and again to the present, which you have seen all these things in your lifetime. So thank you so much. I think, in fact, I'll just share my, yesterday I was reading the budget speech of 1937-38 by Honorable Srijukta Vishwanath Das, the Chief Minister of Odisha. And there it was written that the communal conflicts in Odisha was the least even in 1937 and 38. In a particular context, it was written. So I think, yeah, things have changed a little bit, but yes, you have to be careful of this. And then your suggestions on the health and education. On this, you have to say, recently the slogan is that government has no business to be in business. But that we can also say that the private sector, business has no business in the public sector, public goods. So that should be the approach. if government should not do business, then private sector should not also sell the health and education. But anyway, so we shall definitely try to cover these aspects in the vision document. Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable suggestions. Now we shall move to Professor Udaya Mishra. Sir.
Yes. Amarendra, you can hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. So, after having this two former speakers who spoke and actually have given the energy to this discussion of today, that what exactly is the need and what exactly should be the highlight of preparing a vision document for 2036. And none other than Professor Patnaik, who actually rightly touched the point that motivates anybody to prepare a document, the core issue and the core concern, which is at the heart of doing such an exercise, which should open up, which should evolve out certain of the solutions and agendas for future course correction, that we can be somewhere in a better place in 100 years completion in 2036. Being involved in this initiative, I feel myself quite privileged in the sense that when I should tell a little bit of history, that when I used to be a student, doctoral student in Bombay, we had a course called, we had to write an area study report. And at that point of time in 1990s, even if censuses after censuses were available, we were asked, whichever state you belong to, you write an area study report. And an area study report actually concerns from the area you belong to. You write, because it's a demographic institute, you write about demography of that state. And then we had no idea exactly why should we write about, because it's already census produces figures and you just put those figures, and what extra do you talk? And being a trained demographer, I must say that any vision document is for the people. And when we talk about people and we talk for people, it is very important and crucially vital also to give a kind of trend of what exactly has been the people's count and compositional changes. And the count and compositional changes, as I put it, for 100-year time for the state of Odisha has to be gauged not by the conventional, as you see in many of the reports, like indicators or the kind of changes in composition with characteristics. That becomes routine exercise. The fact that needs to be highlighted in the first beginning is that what are the compositional changes, and those compositional changes particularly referring to certain identities on one hand, and the kind of, when I say population composition, it's not the population count. Population are individuals, and the individuals stay in households. And I think Amarendra will remember that when we had the short meeting with the minister, his emphasis was also about making a kind of an analysis, a trend, a kind of understanding of the transition in Odisha households. What has happened to Odisha households? It's not Odisha's population. It's not about the individuals. It's not about their characteristics or composition. What has happened to the households? When I say that, the chapter we have actually proposed in this will be completely new and very different if we talk about how are Odisha's household composed of, with its characteristics in occupation, with characteristics in economic status, with characteristics in the levels of resilience, levels of land holding, and many other attributes which are never in public domain, as to what has been the evolving pattern of Odisha's households. When people talk about inequality, it is also again on individuals. Like Professor Pulin B just now talked about assets or the asset concentration. Now, if we talk about Odisha households, I think that on one side it has been in the following path of household nucleation, but that is not generic. There has been an inequality and disparity in that as well. There are households which are bimodal, I say. There are households with size of 2 and there are households with size of 9. Okay. Now what happens is if you do a household analysis, not the population analysis, this gives a very clear pattern of why there are situations of disadvantages, there are situations of disparity. All comes from the facts that I sometimes make this often quote, that individuals are not electricity poles that you count. We individuals belong to households. We have numerous identities with us. Apart from that, the basic one is the household. And my well-being depends on what kind of a household I belong to. That household is what kind of dependency, that household is what kind of other deprivations implies on me, despite the fact that I might be capable, I might be having better income. Therefore, one perspective that I want to bring in when we will present a kind of analysis of the trend and evolution of the population in the state, it is not merely on the count of population or the vital rates like people do. I mean, obviously, that's why I began speaking when I was a student. When we write an area study was in 1961, 1971, 1981, what are the changes in vital rates? And second most important, another important point that needs to be plugged in analysis of population is something to do with which is going on, and I think which touches upon this whole issue of employment, the whole issue of youth population, the whole issue of generated capability which remains underutilized, and all the concerns that Professor Prabhat Patnaik raised about industrialization and employment is basically the youth population, the trend that has emerged. And what happens is that the concept of demographic dividend in the state of Orissa needs to be presented in a manner and also slightly deviant from the conventional way demographic dividend is analyzed, because that departure which I am proposing is not in terms of dividend in count, but dividend with adjustment to quality. Because you have number of youth, but number of youth with what kind of educational and skill composition that you have makes the realistic assessment of dividend. So actually, this is an advantage. I would neither not try to paint a green picture of the state in a comparative perspective with other states, like Prof Pulin B was talking about poverty, we talk about other dimensions also. The state of Orissa may not have actually done so well. But what I want to also present is that what are the kind of prospect or what are the kind of positives that is available that needs to be taken into consideration if you plan for a proper progress in development. And that is essentially the youth population in terms of this whole concept of demographic dividend, which connects to the levels of dependency, and then that connects particularly to the first issue which I talked about is households. And demographic dividends are always analyzed again at a population level, at a large population level, where actually the population count, the age structure, its dependency gives a clue to assessment of demographic dividend. But demographic dividend, when it is done in a household perspective, we might find that there are households which have a demographic dividend. Where I say household is a demographic dividend, because levels of reproduction being on a decline, the households being on a path of nucleation, there is dividend which is very clearly visible. But that's not true for all households. That's not true for all characteristics and composition of the households all around. You can have a regional divide in that. You can have a caste divide in that. You can have a characteristics divide of different kind. And that is the second concern that will be very new and different when we talk about the evolution, demographic evolution in the state. And the third one, which is also a very, very, very important, is that Odisha is not an exception to the kind of evolving demographic transition in the country, that you have gains in longevity, you have declines in fertility, and you have an emerging burden of old age population in this particular state also. And this particular state is not that progressive. in terms of social protection or social security, which needs to be highlighted, that emerging prospective social security of the state, and gazing it to evolve in coming 15 years, which we are talking of. 15 years is quite a long time to give you larger numbers of need and demand for social protection and security, which is very, very visible, because it is essential to try to gauge this particular quantum and its regional dimension as well. Because when we talk about Odisha's population in terms of simply an urban-rural divide, you find that Odisha's urbanization is not that high compared to other states. So you have rural population, you have rural longevity gain, you have very minuscule, I would say, attempts at providing social security or protection in the state. And this should be another domain of connection that one should make when we make a population analysis. So 3 major points that I want to be inducted in the analysis is that the whole highlights should move from individual count to household base. The second concern is about doing a demographic dividend perspective analysis of the state over time and how it will look like or what kind of advantage it has for future. And third is basically on count of social security and protection, which is going to be more green given the fact that the gains in longevity and also this economic engagement of elderly people, as Professor Patnaik was rightly telling, that we are not able to even take the talent and expertise which is available to us, obviously that is becoming a waste. So in those connections, if we give some kind of a analysis in the report to anyone to go through, it will be a valued addition of understanding of population dynamic change in the state. And 2 other concerns that also I have been interested in talking is basically health, nutrition, and food security in the state. Now, as Professor Pulin B was just mentioning about the situation of health in Orissa, I would say that my viewpoint is that entire east of India, and if you look at when we talk about development divide, I should say there is a regional divide when it comes to health and health provisioning in this country between east. East will be worst placed versus west or south or north, because I would say that it is completely misplaced in terms of provisioning of healthcare. Because of one reason, that we do analysis of health in a conventional manner, because people till 1970s and 80s, we didn't had much of health information. Health information base itself was very, very scarce. So the count which was used particularly was health outcomes and the kind of disease pattern and surveillance minimally which was available. But post 80s, you have information on health on 3 fronts. You have outcome, you have healthcare utilization, you have health infrastructure, you have human resource for health, and there are many other facets of information which are available beyond the 80s. And in fact, that opens up a very good, interesting exposition of the state of Orissa in terms of the inequality in health infrastructure. Inequality in health infrastructure in the state is abysmal, according to me, and which never gets highlighted because of the fact that we often do an analysis of characteristics differences in outcomes. For instance, whether people are becoming sick, whether rural-urban differences, caste differences, and other things, that does not bring to light any operational intervention. It cannot make operational intervention unless otherwise we actually show that there is a complete regional divide in terms of infrastructural provision. So health infrastructure should be one of the very important highlights of this report and its regional divide. Second is with relation to health and nutrition. Now, of course, nutrition has gained the center stage in debate because of the fact that there is a lot of state emphasis in terms of making Kupushan Mukht Bharat, Kuposan Mukt Odisha. So we have a lot of nutritional intervention that is going on. But when it comes to nutrition, again here I harp on one topic, which is very important, is that it is not intervention of the kind that you provide and you get rid of nutrition. Nutrition or nutritional makeup is a very complex outcome. It's not an outcome of just as it is viewed from food adequacy or food inadequacy perspective, but nutrition in the state needs to be analyzed with the kind of generational difference that has happened. Because with availability of information, there is a generational difference in terms of the kind of nutritional makeup that is visible in the state. And more than the generational difference, I would say that in terms of nutrition analysis over anthropometry or the calorimetric analysis, as it is possible with the information available by National Sample Survey on one hand, and the repeated health surveys which are carried out to collect anthropometric indicators. So most and very important for the state of Odisha is to have an understanding of its marginalized group and their nutritional makeup. Because the nutrition concern is not that much in general when we look at, and if you look at the trend, people are showing satisfying trends of recovery in terms of nutritional makeup. However, if we go into particular group, for instance, I want to highlight tribals nutrition. So in tribal nutrition, you will find a big departure. Second thing is that in terms of calorimetry analysis and anthropometric analysis, Odisha state will perhaps not show a kind of calorimetric signs of better nutritional makeup. It will show a very horrific picture of what is the levels of undernourishment in the state if we take calorimetric analysis of households per capita consumption, household per capita, what is called the calorie intake, and then we will situate the state in a very, very worse level. The only conflict between the two measures is that the anthropometric measures are outcomes directly, and the calorimetric measure are on the consumption side. So calorimetric measure suffers from one thing, that you have household figures, you do not have individual figures. Therefore, to maintain a balance, we must generate in our own writing a debate and a consensus between what is the reality of nutritional situation in the state by considering anthropometry as well as calorimetric assessment. The characteristics features are important, and more importantly, I would say that if we want to gauge nutritional progress or the nutritional makeup in the state, we need to highlight 2 to 3 very important parts which are something to do with one is consumption pattern, one is conspicuous consumption, then one is the choice of food baskets. In recent times, actually, I was trying to argue that it is not merely food, but also the nutritional makeup, the sustained nutritional makeup has to be seen along with food, with healthcare as well. Because the healthcare utilization domain in the state of Odisha is not equal across regions, as I told you initially. And despite the fact that there is ICDS, there are interventions, we can have outcomes of children outcomes which can be monitored. But to sustain a better nutritional level, it needs to be gauged till adulthood and post-adulthood. So if that is done, it will perhaps give a comprehensive picture of nutrition and nutritional analysis in the state. Finally, this whole idea of food security analysis that we want to take up, it's a little contentious in the sense that the food availability, we can have a macro assessment of food availability and the distributional handicaps which is actually generating food insecurity. But apart from that, it's also important that what is the dependence on agriculture, food generation or food production levels of the state and the kind of diversity in that. And if we connect to the macro picture of food products or food production and then to distributional aspect, we can see that actually the food insecurity generates from the distributional handicap, and also from another perspective, which is very, very important, is that why is food security an issue? Is because of the kind of informalization of wages. Because informalization of wages, we cannot detach the kind of food insecurity or the vulnerability to food buying under price conditions in which the poor buy the food is not connected with the kind of informalization of wages. So this is something which never is related. It is purely looked at in terms of who is food insecure, where is food inadequacy. We can have parametric or kind of benchmark fixation and get a level. But the reason behind it is mostly because of the fact that food provisioning, though all kind of case and kind provisioning discussion is going on, but kind provisioning in the state has been doing well even till now. And if we do a survey, I think the state of Orissa, the perception towards kind provisioning will be more, people will be more in favor of kind rather than cash. So this is a thing which we can connect to. And finally, I was also thinking that we can, I wish to talk something about preparation of Orissa for a knowledge economy. And here comes the education component. We can give actually the entire evolving trend of education sector in the state, whether it relates to educational infrastructure, educational outcome, educational composition and progress, and many things else. But normally what happens, education analysis does not go beyond the formal information base that we have in different levels of education reported and all. But there is many other dimensions which come in here nowadays, is that we have multilingual education. You have things like digital intervention in education, and they play a very important role for the future. And when I talk about preparing Orissa for a knowledge economy, it is more important to make an analysis in the state of Orissa, which is a very pet subject that I currently am engaging with, is education-occupation mismatch. You have levels of education much higher, and you have an occupation which you are not entitled. There are certain occupations where actually unduly highly educated people are there in that occupation. And the very simple example to that is you find a lot of engineers as bank clerks. You didn't produce engineers to sit in the bank as clerks. But that has happened, and that goes overlooked because of the fact that people do not want to see that education has given, education and wages increase is fine, but education and occupation mismatch is a dangerous trend. Because if we, all of us in newspapers, we read that there's a post of advertisement for a post of mentor or a peon, then you find that all master degree holders are applying for that post. What does that mean? And when we talk about employment, what employment can we give that they will be happy with? It is not about giving employment. It's not about providing employment. It is about, are we having an education and skill match with the evolving labor market or not? And that is very, very crucial. And that if we do, along with the fact that we are in moving towards digitization, is there digital education introduced? Is digital intervention adaptable? How much is the extent of adaptability? To give you statistics, actually, 15 plus years of age individual with acquaintance with digital operation in Orissa households, only we have 7% of Orissa households where this particular trend is possible. 15 plus with a digital adaptability. Anybody with 15 plus in a household. Imagine 7%, you have 93% of the household where it is not there. We often say, is there a computer or not? Is there an internet facility or not? That does not matter. It is basically, first important thing is, are we making people digitally affluent, I would say? Are we making people digitally adaptable? And if that is done, then in fact, for a knowledge economy, this particular chapter that we are aiming at, I want three kind of perspective to be analyzed. One is education to occupation mismatch, as I told. Second is educational progression happening without an intent of a proper occupation? Because when you are professionalizing education to a large extent, and you should not professionalize education in a manner that you produce thousands of engineers and give them a 5,000 rupees salary. That's not professionalizing. Professionalizing actually skills and education is about what the connection between education provisioning and the labor market conditions. If that is done, then obviously education occupation mismatch will be minimized to the large extent. And third and very important part that I wanted to highlight here is that Odisha's progress towards a knowledge economy depends not merely with an analysis of the levels of education attended. The levels of education attended can be analyzed with educational progression analysis, but that educational progression analysis might have improved over time as well. But people are in education does not necessarily mean that they are actually not in job, therefore they are in education. So when you have availability of educational infrastructure and expanding infrastructure, then the value of obtaining a degree or the value of obtaining a particular educational qualification is not that important. It is very important to see that and one of the things which is also crucial, that when we talk about employment, detach education from employment. It is the skills, it is not the educational level. So how much of Odisha's education policy or the educational instructions or the pedagogy involves the kind of skill demand that is in the market. So if you look at it, for instance, people going for professional education in the South, for instance, why nursing education has become so popular? Because of the fact that it has a job market connection. If we do not have that, what we do, we produce graduates, and we are also in the same wave of engineering degrees, which almost all private institutions are exploitative units of collecting money and giving a degree. And the best example that I can give you is that if you look at the GATE examination result and Odisha qualifiers, that will tell you the whole story of a national level test where Odisha's engineering graduates qualify to what percentage level. So this is essentially to be highlighted. These data are available, which needs to be presented to say what are the failures in terms of expansion of education in the state, and then how are those failures to be rectified in terms of regulation and monitoring. This is all I will say for the chapter which we are planning for knowledge. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, sir. For a very comprehensive discussion. I think this can directly, form the outline of the chapters. And since you are given so many chapters to be covered, and I understand you have covered almost everything. In fact, we are noting down all the points so that we can easily prepare the template for each chapter. Okay. So for the other speakers, I just announced something that since we have so many speakers, we have to keep our space limited to maybe 5 to 7 minutes so that everyone gets a chance, and then we also have proper discussion because we have so many senior people in the audience. I think they would also like to put some suggestions. So I request all the speakers to keep their suggestions within 7 to maximum 10 minutes. So 7 plus 3. Okay. So now it's over to Professor Keshab Das.
Thank you, Amarendra. This has been a great opportunity to be amongst learned people, learned economists, and many of them have informed or their work we have learned so much from, and so it's very nice to be in their midst. And as Amarendra said, that there is a time limit, but then there are too many topics I'm supposed to handle, but I don't think I'll be really taking much time. But then at the same time, I may not also be talking too much in detail, but I'll be largely sort of touching on the main points, and the four sort of sectors or subsectors or areas that have been given includes industrialization, then the IT and startups, tourism, and some reflection on the integration of Odisha with the world economy. So I'll be very, very brief. And anyway, the stage has been set by Professor Prabhat Patnaik, Professor Pulin Nayak, and also even Professor Mishra has given fairly detailed ideas to how we are supposed to be planning the chapters. So so far as the industrialization part is concerned, which includes all large enterprises, the MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and also focusing on handicrafts to an extent. So essentially, as Professor Prabhat Patnaik was also mentioning, that one of the key sort of focus of an industrialization strategy has often not just to sort of like being more efficient or to produce more, but also to create a large-scale employment. I think that's the most relevant point, I would say. And so value addition and sort of creating of jobs. So it's a kind of a dual objective, and that's where I think we have to sort of walk a tightrope. So that's where, because you're dealing with a state which has sort of very huge, substantial resources, I mean, particularly mineral resources, other states, other nations would be envious of, like very, very sort of important economic minerals like iron ore, coal, bauxite, manganese, nickel, chromite, limestone, dolomite, graphite, and a bright china clay, a tin ore, and just a very wide range of resources on which on which basis industrialization sort of should normally take off. So we do not have a problem in terms of resources, but I think in terms of the strategies, I think which, so I'll be sort of focusing my sort of talk around these three sort of, let's say, broad constructs, the processes, the institutions, and the strategies for all the sectors that I'm dealing with. So far as the industrialization is concerned, large industrialization, we know that, I mean, we have really sort of moved much sort of farther ahead from our experiences in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when the industrial sort of like, if you take the state, I mean, the share of industries in the state domestic product, it was just about around 8% to the very recent information, which sort of keeps it close to almost sort of 39.5%, making this as a very, very important part of the income generation for the state economy. But then we also know that much of this is coming actually from a few capital-intensive industries, which are so largely sort of what you may call the extractive or the mineral resource-based industry. I think this is where, I think, so far as this part is concerned, I think maybe we have to really rethink in terms of what kind of processing or what levels of processing that we are talking about. So maybe sort of we have to rethink sort of second and third and fourth stages of processing of minerals or mineral products, so which might create more employment and also add value. And the second point comes to the MSMEs, because the time constraint, I'm going a little fast, the micro, small, and medium enterprises. We know that something like more than 97% of the enterprises which are sort of called as MSMEs, so they are actually very, very small micro units investing something like less than, certainly less than 25 lakhs per unit, but then of which about 91% invest just about less than 5 lakhs of rupees per enterprise. So that means you are talking about extremely small, tiny units, and many of them, more than maybe close to 60% of them in rural areas. So these are, I think, that MSME sector, and within that, the rural units and those who are sort of craft-based or artisan sector, that is where I think we need actually a complete rethinking, and really we have to think in terms of what also Professor Patnaik was referring to as like, so linking it to the local economy. Actually, I think we have to give one of the strategies to really rethink the local economy in terms of creating the backward linkages. So that is where I think the income generation part comes up. And like, suppose one is suggesting something like they're going in for agro clustering, for instance. And so the ideas around that, even what Professor Patnaik was referring to as the design contribution, so all that actually sort of links to the kind of already existing advantages we have in terms of the skills, in terms of certain kinds of resources. I think that is where I think we need a lot of huge sort of rethinking in terms of institutional innovation, in terms of whether how the credit might reach the smaller firms, and what kind of markets so at different layers, and not necessarily confined only to the local or the state markets. I think that is where I think the rethink is needed. Of course, we have sort of thought in terms of aluminium park, the plastics park, and few such cluster ideas we already have. But I think that's where we really need a rethink. So from there, we have to really think in terms of certain kinds of crucial business support infrastructure. So no business, so whether large or small or whatever industry we are talking about. So, and one of the crucial inputs I would sort of mention is sort of provision of electricity to the enterprises. So these are some of the very and what the Chinese experience of the town and village enterprises that we're talking about. The first investments came not actually in the enterprises. In fact, the investment came in into the certain sort of business development services, certain business infrastructure, which included warehousing. Suppose we are trying to process the agro products, for instance, in terms of electricity, in terms of access to roads. So all that needs to be rethought, and also in terms of marketing your products. So with that, and linking that to sort of technology institutions. So all that becomes part of a larger strategy. So far as the IT sector is concerned, the IT startups, I think the state government has already sort of like come up with a grand idea of starting something to have about some 1,000 startups in the coming 5 years. It's not a bad idea at all. And I think that's where, and maybe there is a huge role to play for the software technology parts of India, the STPI. And I think in terms of the making Odisha as at least one of the three largest IT hubs in the country. So the plans have been approved, and I think that is where probably we need to sort of invest a little more time in the chapters that will be dealing with what kind of strategies, including sort of focusing on sort of technical education, and technical education to focusing on certain kinds of a curriculum which actually addresses sort of like issues like disruptive technologies, for instance, like you are talking about Internet of Things, you are talking of artificial intelligence. So these have to be very much part of the technical education or technical education curriculum that we have, and that's how probably we build strength so that the local population might sort of find a certain kind of employment. And I will now very quickly move to the tourism sort of sector. And so as you know that again, this is another sort of very prominent sort of sector which can sort of create a lot of local income, and there is a huge potential of generating employment, whether it is sort of related. And there has been a lot of experiments, a lot of efforts made by the government and even a large number of private parties to sort of promote what is known as the experiential tourism, sort of which includes a lot of like I mean what you may call roughly as the ecotourism maybe. So, but then there are sort of various ways by which we have to rethink what kind of value addition can be made, and where else, like how it can actually be linked to, let's say, the regional and the global value chains. So that is where I think the rethink for the tourism sector would come in. And the last point, because of the time constraint, we are sort of talking about integration of Odisha into the global economy. I mean, so far as the production process is concerned, like suppose you are sort of talking about certain kinds of, let's say, manufacturing processes, whether sort of your small and medium enterprises to be part of a global value chain. So that we are talking in terms of actually participating in sort of production networks, global production networks, but that is where I think we really need to think through institutional innovations by which the state can actually come in and sort of be ensure that certain kind of a transparent contract between the global buyer and the local supplier. To ensure that that is made, and that is one major way by which the local suppliers, the local producers, even when they are producing what is known as the intermediaries, they might actually be in a position to join the global market. This is so far as the production or the manufacturing part is concerned. But then, so far as the other sectors like tourism or IT sector is concerned, we have to think about what kind of value chain that we're talking about and what kind of local integration is possible. So I would rather see this as more of focusing. One of my key suggestions would be to look for what I may call as the finding out the backward linkages to the local and rural economies. And the other thing is how to sort of enhance the value at the local place, value generation at the local place, and also to be open in terms of really going in for what you may call as institutional innovations, which are essentially sort of making changes in certain kind of set policy norms, which often sort of obstruct progress of certain sectors or subsectors, which are very much which are often sort of dependent on a variety of sort of heterogeneous stakeholders. So with that, I'll stop, Amarendra.
Thank you so much, sir, for finishing within time. I understand a lot of issues have been given again to many of you, and asking you to finish within 5-7 minutes is not actually good. But then, yeah, we have time constraints. So at the end, actually, if we get time, we'll have discussion. We have about 30 minutes for open discussion. I think there we can cover many other issues. So now I invite Professor Saudamini Das. Professor Saudamini Das is working at Institute of Economic Growth. Now, yeah, it's over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Amarendra. Good evening to everybody. I think there is some resound. Can you hear me properly? Amarendra, can you?
Yes, I can hear. Actually, I think since my mic was on, probably the Rajiko, I think it will be clear if I put it off. Yeah.
Thank you. So, thank you to invite me. And after this eloquent, discussion by everybody, so I'm just going to restrict myself to the sector. I have been asked to talk about the natural sector of Orissa. And all of you will agree that Orissa is actually in the front when the natural sector comes. So we say Orissa is the disaster capital of the country. And at the same time, we also say that Orissa is a resource-rich poor economy. Our natural resource endowment is so rich, but at the same time, economically, we have really not been able to reach that level. So now this comes to the question, whether the natural resource is being managed well, whether it is being exploited, efficiently, whether there has been optimal allocation of the resources to different sectors, etc. So I'm going to, restrict myself to the topics that has been allotted to me and only say what extra should be done along with whatever you have already demarcated. So the first point that I want to make here is that we should have a framework to make the analysis more, structured and link it to the different sector of the economy. So like natural resource use is very much dependent and also says how this is being used to sectoral growth of the Odisha economy. So I suggest that we should use the DPSIR framework. That is the driver, pressure, state, impact and response. So this framework will tell us how much of a natural resource is being used, what are the drivers of natural resource, whether we are actually using it optimally or not, and what are the different pressures, what is the present state of affairs with the natural resources, and what are the impact, and what has been the state response. So this framework should be used both for the natural resource management chapter as well as for the pollution, the environment sector. So then coming to the other things, like we already have a section on the minerals. So along with the different minerals and how they are being used, I will suggest that we should also use the restoration of the mining area. Now there has been a lot of work going on the restoration ecology of the mining area, and because in Orissa we have so many of mineral resources are being extracted, so how that mining area is being restored back or they are lagging behind. So that will say a lot about the environmental impact of the natural resource extraction. Then coming to forestry and common property resources, We should also have a separate section on mangroves and the shelter-bed plantation, which are very, very, critical for the Orissa coast. And there has been a lot of discussion on those. So these also should be included and see how they are been playing role in the state economy. Coming to water sector, there has been I think we should separately talk about the surface water as well as groundwater, particularly when you talk about the regional distribution of groundwater and how that is being, playing a role in the water provisioning of the different areas. So we should really have a chapter more specifically on the groundwater and the extraction, what has been the state of affairs at the moment. And also we should talk about the drinking and irrigation provision. How, what percentage of the population are having these facilities on drinking water, and how many are lagging this drinking water, and what are the different sources, and so also the irrigation facilities. I think in context of Western Orissa, where the drought is such a severe issue over there, irrigation facilities in that region also I think matters a lot. So we should have a discussion on that. Coming to land use pattern, I think we should add the property rights for forest land, diversion of forest land, also restoration under CAMPA. So these are the three additional things that I will suggest to add over here. So because now we have so much of discussion on the forest land and the property rights, what belongs to whom, basically the question of tribals' property rights over the land. So we should have a discussion on that. And the most important, I think, that really makes a sense in Orissa is the religious land, the Endowment Act. So a lot of land belongs to the religious institutions which are really not being managed well, or even if they're being managed well, I don't know whether the resources are being appropriated properly or not. How the state is being benefited from those land. I think we also should find out how much land is under the Endowment Act and with the religious institutions, and whether they are being managed well or not. That also should be talked about. So there was one section that you mentioned, soil health also should be combined, should be there in the natural resource management. But I think soil health really belongs to agriculture. Because whenever you talk about poor soil health, that is because of the intensive agriculture that you are following. So this should be shifted to the agriculture sector, and I think it's not really resource management per se. Coming to pollution, we already have identified air and water pollution, and I think we should also add a plastic solution. And at the same time, have something on the waste management policy, both the solid waste as well as the liquid waste management policy of the country. Like Orissa was famous to have a very good, waste management policy, like the Athanala in Puri. So I think the waste management infrastructure has been very rich historically, but at the moment, waste management may not be so efficient. So should have a chapter and link it up to Swachh Bharat, if the state has been benefited or not. Now, coming to natural disaster, I think everybody knows this is one area where the Orissa is always in the forefront. So we have the different prominent natural disasters, and with us, I think we have cyclones, flood, heat waves, and drought. These are the four prominent natural disasters that Orissa is facing time and again. And to that, I think we should also add lightning, because this is a consistent killer in the state. So both the frequency and how the frequency has been changing. So these are the things that you should see. Like in my analysis, I see 1965 as a break-even year. Before 1965, maybe the reporting was not there, or maybe the natural disaster frequency was very low. But after 1965, there has been a very significant, consistent increase in almost all the natural disasters every year. So we should also see how the disaster frequencies are changing and how they are changing their area affected by that, the regional distribution, as well as the economic cost and the pattern. So now, so coming to, then we have covered almost everything: the management of disaster, the economic cost, and the disaster management policy of the government, the rehabilitation policy. I think we should also add the resilience building. So whether the government is only managing the disasters or they're also trying to build the resilience of the population who are being affected by that. I think, at least in my experience, I see the government of Orissa has done some work on a resilience building to cyclone or flood, but there has nothing been done for other disasters, especially for drought. So we should have, this particular aspect being covered in the natural disaster management chapter. And then the next important thing is natural disaster and financial transfer. So whether we have been able to, get adequate compensation and financial help from the center as well as from the international sources. So far or not, like after the super cyclone, when it was managed well, most of the international sources are refusing to help Orissa, saying that okay, Orissa is doing well, they are being able to manage the disaster well, so there is no need to help them. I think this is a very wrong picture being sent to the outside people. So though Orissa is being managing disasters well, but the state economy is suffering so much. So this aspect needs to be covered in natural disaster and financial transfer section. Then on climate change, again, Odisha is having impact. So we should discuss the sectoral impact of the climate change, particularly the agricultural sector. And what we need to add over here is climate change, women, and climate change and tribals. So these are the two issues that needs to be added to whatever you have already identified to be included under climate change. And coming to climate change action plan, so we have both action plan from the center, action plan from the state, and also we should be including the action plan from the international agencies, especially UNFCCC, the Adaptation Fund, as well as the Green Climate Fund. So like under climate change action, Orissa has been receiving lot many grants, both from the central government and also from the international agencies. So whether they are adequate and what is our requirement, the impact of the climate change, the loss and damage from the climate change, and how much you are receiving. So this gap needs to be highlighted. So I think these are the things that I feel needs to be done along with whatever you have already identified. So this chapter 13 and 14, I think very well structured. So if you put it into a particular framework and add these things, I think we will make a good contribution and good vision document. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am, so much again for a very comprehensive outline. Yeah, we have, again, I have noted down and my students are also noting down things, and hopefully we'll be able to cover all those aspects.
I have this written document. I can share the written document with you.
Please, please share the written document to us, and so that we can directly give it to the author, whoever will be writing. Now we have not decided who will be the author, but then once it is decided, we can directly share. Okay. So now I would invite Professor Deepak Mishra to share his views on employment, migration, and regional disparity. For the information, Professor Deepak Mishra works at JNU. Yeah, so it's over to you, Professor Deepak Mishra.
Thank you, Amarendra. Good evening to everyone. I'll be brief, and before moving to the specific topics on which I've been asked to present my views, I'll present a general, a general concern, not because my co-panelists or members who are part of this exercise are not aware of this, but I think as a kind of self-clarification, we should remember that preparing vision documents or preparing a vision for future are intensely, loadedly, these are political exercises. And in every turn of the history, it is the elites of a society who have, projected their vision as the vision of the society, of the economy, or of the state or the nation. And when that elite does that depending on their vision, depending on their intentions, at times elites project their interests or their vision and to the entire society, and as a result of which we find various kind of contradictions creeping up. As a professional body, we can't probably escape from the realities, but at the same time, I think we should be aware of the fact that it is possible to have multiple visions of the future, and we should be aware an exercise in terms of making a vision of future, unless it represents the vision of a large segment of population, particularly those whose voices are not easily found in our dominant media. That exercise is going to have of very limited use. So let's try to make a vision for Odisha where people matter, the ordinary people of Odisha matter. So from that perspective, the topics that I have been assigned to, they are of crucial significance. They bring together concerns of marginalization, concerns of being left behind, concerns of being not being part of the development process. I'm glad that the way the question of employment and labor has already been highlighted by my previous speakers, particularly Professor Patnaik and other speakers as well. So we need to so labor should not be seen as a sectoral or as a kind of a particular chapter in the overall framework. Rather, everything that we are planning for the future, for everything that we are thinking of as a necessary step towards making or developing the Odisha economy, I think it should act as a kind of test. We should ask questions like, for example, if the current development process, has it been
Is there some network issue with Professor Deepak Mishra?
I think so. I think so because he is not audible. I think there is some network issue.
Okay, let me.
for capital? So in that sense,
We missed your voice for 2 minutes.
okay.
So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just. Okay.
Okay, we had listened up
Okay,
to you
let me,
that
yeah.
Whether the current development process is taking care of the employment.
Right. So it's not only about the extent of employment generation. Am I, please, Amarendra, you will remind me if I'm, I think my connection is not very good. So please let me know. So the concern is not about enough employment opportunities. The concern is also about creating employment in a sustainable manner, and also the quality of employment. Because if indeed development is about enhancing or expanding the choices of people, capabilities of people, then it's not just about the number of employment, the extent of employment, but it is also about what kind of employment that you are trying to generate through these development. Now that is why this question is significant, because we are going to live in a situation where there is increasing asymmetry in terms of the power of capital, global capital in particular, and labor. And states like Odisha, and governments like the Odisha government have to negotiate this power asymmetry between capital. It has been found in many contexts that one of the easiest way to attract capital is by sidestepping, by ignoring the question of labor standards, the question of protection of labor and environment. So even if something, so the concern that I want to raise is that even if we identify some sector as key sectors or drivers of economic growth, we need to think in the process of developing this sector, are we giving too much in terms of labor standard, living conditions, working conditions of labor, and particularly in terms of the environmental concerns. So because that has been that is going to be one of the crucial choices that economies like Odisha have to make. They are making, and they are going to make in future as well. We have to look at patterns and structures of exclusion, segregation, and discrimination that is existing and is emerging in the context of labor markets. because the unevenness of outcomes within the labor market is something which is going to have a significant impact for our future. We know that Odisha's underdevelopment and poverty, very, repeatedly we hear that Odisha poverty levels are relatively high, but we also should remember that this poverty and underdevelopment is socially and regionally concentrated. So are these employment opportunities that we are trying to generate going to minimize such inequality, or are these going to perpetuate such inequalities further? This question has to be asked in a point blank manner. And employment, if that remains a concern, and we link it with expansion of capabilities as a developmental goal, then we probably need to think of a labor-centric development path, and the interventions by Professor Patnaik, Prabhat Patnaik in particular, points to the elements that might, that might be used to create a vision of labor-centric development. Coming to the question of migrants and migration in Odisha, we all know that this COVID-19 pandemic and then the aftermath of that, we saw the migrant crisis, and we saw how the people of Odisha were affected by this. But the underlying factor is that the diversity that exists within the migration streams. On an average, we have evidence to argue that migrants in general in India are, on an average, are better off than the host population. But we also saw the proof of the existence of a class of mobile reserve labor who are surviving us under such hyper precarity that they were not in a position to withstand a sudden fall of earnings even for a few weeks. That tells a lot about the existing conditions of migrant labor who are moving out of Odisha. Although we are aware of that migration from Odisha is on the rise, we probably do not know enough. We should be careful in understanding the processes through which people are migrating out. What we know, on the basis of that, we can say that on the one hand, there is a process of out-migration of skilled labor to better paying jobs, particularly in the cities elsewhere. And we can imagine the gains from remittances and associated factors. And this probably could be a contributing factor for economic regeneration in the host areas, districts particularly. But so far as the majority is concerned, I think the vulnerability part of migrants, the distress part of migration streams needs to be understood much more carefully. The migration decisions, constraints, and processes through which people migrate, they point to a situation where a substantial section of migrants, particularly the circular migrants, they can be categorized as unfree labor in a rapidly developing economy. Dadan is probably an extreme case, but at the same time, let us understand that this has continued for so long that this has become part of a durable strategy for a large section of poor, particularly in the backward regions of Odisha. So, if that is so, then we need to ask that what these migration flows are doing to the economy of the Odisha, and what kind of future we are planning with this kind of migration flows. Now, it's nobody's case to restrict migration. Probably we are going to see more migration in coming future, even the migration of the distress kind in future. But we should not come to a complacent understanding of migration because of its linkages with the livelihood of the poor and distressed population in Odisha. Why I'm saying this is because this flow of remittances, this income and earnings opportunities that migration provides, even for the worst in the case of distress-induced migration, might lead us to believe that this is probably a way out of poverty. People are migrating out, and in any case, what they are getting at the destination is more than what they are getting at the origin areas. But then we should ask, from keeping the vision for future at the center stage, we should ask, should this be the preferred way out of poverty? Should this kind of distress-induced migration be our preferred way out of poverty? Because there are costs involved, which we have the lifetime costs. These are life cycle costs of such migration have not been factored in well. So we need to think of innovative ways of supporting migration by two sets of, I mean, we can think about the, I will not go into the details of that strategy, but broadly two kinds. One is trying to create conditions for better employment opportunities, better health and education outcomes at the origin, so that those who migrate out, they have a better bargaining position in the labor market. And B, making social security available to all the migrants, and the Odisha government as a state which is responsible for these migrants should take a lead in terms of collaborating and creating a social security that goes, universal social security for migrant workers that is completely detached from the domicile status. The last point that I would touch briefly is on regional development. Regional disparities are one of the fundamental contradictions with which Odisha was born. But at the same time, the process of development, the political economy of development over the past many years has made it a durable feature of Odisha's economic development. This needs to be corrected. This needs to be addressed rather than brushed aside. Because the way we see the spatial concentration and social concentration overlap in Odisha, of backwardness and poverty overlap in Odisha, this is not simple, not a simple matter of some areas growing and some areas not growing. There is an organic linkage, I believe, between the prosperity of some areas and the lack of development in others. But to do that, again, this is one area where we need probably more information, because our understanding on the basis of inter-district differences and NSS region-based analysis is probably not good enough to understand the regional dynamics of accumulation, growth, and underdevelopment. We need to have more grounded, sophisticated analysis of the regional configurations which are coming up in present-day Odisha. The one way of addressing this problem is through popular aspirations, but I think we should have a dispassionate analysis of the new regions which are emerging. For example, the new regions of industrialization that have emerged in various parts of Odisha, the relationship between emerging regions of industrialization and the kind of poverty regimes which we see in these same very regions, and the linkages between regions of accumulation, types of regional accumulation, and types of backwardness. These questions need to be put at the forefront. One way to go forward, in terms of practical action, is to have a critical review of the regional development plans that have already been put in place, identify their limitations, and then visualize alternative regional imaginations of development. And one can start with the panchayat based regeneration of the economy, the local linkages that have been identified and by my previous speakers as a starting point to build better regional and local linkages for future development. In other words, these two areas, migration and regional development, before we move further, we probably need to clarify for ourselves what is happening on the ground. Just one last sentence, because current understanding may not be reflecting the ground realities, particularly in the case of migration. The recent evidence suggests that there is an incredibly segmented nature of migration outflow. Specific regions, not even district, not even sub-districts, even below that, cluster of villages, cluster of areas, depending on their resource positions, you see specific kinds of out-migration from there. In other words, a vision for Odisha, a bottom-up vision for Odisha would require a more grounded analysis of regional inequalities, as well as the spatial and social concentration and of poverty and out-migration from Odisha. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mishra, for raising very important issues, particularly when you started your discussion, particularly that the vision document is basically an elitist approach. The elites present their vision, so we have to be extra careful of all sections of the society. And I am thinking as well how to address this issue. I don't know whether our regional consultations can address this, and basically including in this consultation process, so that we can include people from all walk of life. In fact, one of the suggestions that was coming from Professor, our former Chief Secretary Jugal Keshab Patra, that no, we should take a survey actually of different people, okay, and look at their aspirations actually. Okay, so we shall discuss in details how to basically address this important issue. And this is a very important concern actually that we have raised. I think this will be valid for I think the entire document. So yeah, okay. So thank you so much for raising very important issues during your presentation. Now we'll move to Professor Mitali Chinara.
Hello? Amarendra, you're not audible.
Sorry, I muted myself. Okay,
Yeah.
so now it's over to you. Yeah, Mitali
Yeah.
ma'am will cover gender and cultural aspects.
Thank you so much. Namaskar to all. It's really a privilege to get this opportunity to share a few of my thoughts in this August gathering. I must first thank all those who are present and for giving me this opportunity. I have been asked to talk about two things. One is gender. The second one is cultural diversity. The first, starting off, I'll not take much of a time. I'll just finish in 5 minutes. So when we talk about gender, there is a line which emerges and which is that gender perspectives, as we know, will emerge as cross-cutting themes within most of the chapters. Whatever discussions we make, we shall have gender as a cross-cutting theme. For example, if you're talking about whether you're talking about employment and unemployment scenario, what is the situation? If you're talking about workforce participation, when you're talking about skill, when you're talking about education or professionalization of education, if you're talking about healthcare, in terms of healthcare, whether it is accessibility, utilization, outcomes, all those things, everywhere we shall talk about gender will willy-nilly come into the picture because we have to see it from a gender perspective. Similarly, we are talking about migration. A little while ago, Dr. Mishra was talking about migration, the kind of migration that we see, the migration data, the imperatives of migration for a man and a woman are not the same. We all know that. So all those things, gender will emerge as a cross-cutting theme in terms of startups, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of the panchayat level industries that Professor Patnaik spoke in the beginning. In terms of self-help groups, the Mission Shakti is very popular and very active. Is very active in the state. So all these things, gender will emerge as a theme, and we have to look at gender. And when you talk about gender emerging as a theme, precisely what we shall talk about, or we shall look at, basically we'll look at the gender gap. But I suggest, in my view, we not only look at the gender gaps as they exist, but we also look at the gaps as they have changed over a period of time. Over the time, depending on the data availability, keeping in mind the availability of data, we should also look at how these gender gaps have changed over a period of time. And within that, when you look at the changes in the gender gaps which has taken place in various contexts, we must also look at what proportion of the gaps are explained by by observable factors, and how these proportions have behaved over time. And we may also like to investigate, as a straight thought, I would like to say that we may like to, or it will be wise to investigate the issue of intersectionality. Like, for example, how gender identities intersect with other social identities and how they affect the ultimate outcome. Like gender identities, when they intersect with the social identities, and so in terms of class or caste, how they behave and how they determine the final outcome, and try to offer an explanation for the change. And looking at the gender gaps in the context of Orissa, and then finally we can also compare and contrast Odisha's position with the all India situation. Like, what is the position at the national level, and where we stand, and what is the way forward, whether the gaps are converging, whether the gaps are coming down, or whether that there is a divergence in the gap, and all those gender issues must be a part of our analysis. And without these gender issues, we cannot talk about a vision for Odisha in 2036. Now I will come to the other topic which has been assigned to me. I'm not sure whether this has been given to me as a default, but nonetheless I accept it. Dr. Raut pointed out that we should also take into account the cultural capital of Odisha, and I would like to mention it here that I think Odisha for a long period of time in the national and international arena. If you talk about Odisha, many people, there has been narratives which says that people did not, for a long time, they were not. If Odisha was known, it was known for two things. One was for Jagannath Puri, and the other was for Odissi dance. And apart from these two, identity of Odisha, it was not known for other things apart from this. Now, I agree that situation has undergone a sea change, but yet, when we look at 2036, we are talking about, and we are envisioning Odisha in the year 2036. Unless we take into account the unique and distinct culture of Odisha, we cannot envision Odisha, the vision of Odisha in 2036, without including the unique, distinct culture of Odisha. Will not be complete. The picture of Odisha in 2036. Minus or without these cultural identities, these cultural heritages will be incomplete. And when I talk about this, these are 23rd Vision Odisha 2036 is not going to be merely an economic document. It will not cover only economics. It will be a holistic document. So in that sense, these unique cultural traditions must find it should find a place, because not only they give us an identity at the national and international level. When you're talking about linking Odisha to the global scenario, these kinds of identities cannot be overlooked. Not only they provide us with an identity, they provide livelihood to a majority to a large section of the people. They provide the uniqueness to us, to the Odia identity. Without these cultural parts, will not be complete, in my opinion. They provide what is referred to as, we can talk about the unique selling proposition of Odisha. And when I talk about, we have many, in fact, innumerable number of traditions and cultures. But we can talk about, I'll talk about a few of them, just flag off certain issues while keeping it in mind that this list is not comprehensive. We can have many more, and or we can have a shorter list with expert consultation. We can include architecture. Architecturally, architecturally Odisha is very rich. There is no doubt about it. Then we can talk about the arts of Odisha, and in arts of Odisha, we should look at the Pattachitra. We can include the rock painting, the sand art, the silver filigree, the applique work, the brass and dhokra work. All these things are unique. They're unique to the Odishan culture. Then comes the Odishan, the classical dance and music, which includes the Odissi dance and music, the Chau, and then of course comes the folk dance and music. Odisha, different regions have a lot of folk dances which are unique in Odisha. And finally, the Odishan handloom. Odishan handloom, we have talked about, Prof Patnaik spoke about the Sambalpuri sari, the Sambalpuri Ikkat design, which has, of course, got the GI tag and so on. So all these are a part of the art and culture of Odisha. And while talking about this, all these issues, we can talk about the historical origin of these art forms. We can talk about how these forms have developed over a period of time. What is the current status? We can also talk about whether it's a thriving art form or a dying art form. Many of the art forms are dying out because people engaged in these art forms are not able to eke out a livelihood from them. What are the training facilities available, and what are the means of propagation of these art forms to the next generation? And we can also talk about the number of people who are practicing it as a livelihood strategy. And we also must endeavor, that should be an endeavor to include a discussion on the current state of livelihood generated by these art and culture people who are practicing, who are practical practitioners of this art and culture. Like we see that Odisha dance, if I talk about Odisha dance is a dance form which is practiced all over the world. But what is happening to the people, the practitioners of Odisha dance in the place where it has originated, or the if you talk about the Gotipuo form from which Odisha dance has emerged, what is happening to the Gotipuas in the place from where it has emerged? People are attaining, a national and international stature, no doubt, but what is happening to the people from the land where it originated? The land, for example, a place like Raghurajpur, which is not only known for Gotipo, it is also known for, the Pattachitra, which is world famous. But what is happening? Pattachitra is occupying a place of importance in many, in your living rooms across the globe. But what is happening to the houses or the living rooms or the living standards of the people who are trying to kind of eke out a living out of doing these kinds of practice? So art and cultural heritage can be incorporated into it, because these are kind of a soft power, and this is a part of our we can say this is a pathway for integrating Odisha and developing Odisha and developing Odisha as a knowledge society and integrating with the larger, wider global arena. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, very much for covering different aspects of the gender issues and the cultural economy. I don't know if this word will be appropriate, the cultural economy, because you are not only talking about the cultural issues, but also the livelihood and the economy that is linked to the culture. So that's why I thought, can I put it as cultural economy of the state?
Sorry, Amarendra. Maybe you can use an expression like creative economy. That's how this is being globally.
Creative.
Okay. Creative economy. That's how it is being used.
Yeah. So thank you, ma'am, very much for listing out all the issues. Okay. Now we'll move to the one veteran person, Professor Rabi Narayan Patra. Sir has been waiting. Okay. Sir, it's over to you now. Okay, for the information of some people, that Professor Rabi Narayan Patra was the secretary of Orissa Economics Association before me, and now he's working at Ports Koraput. Sir, it's over to you now for agriculture issues. Please unmute and speak. Professor Rabi Narayan Patra.
Hello, Amarendra, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes,
Hello?
sir, you are audible. Please go. Yes, sir. Very clear. You go ahead.
Hello?
Sir, Subhuchi, go sir. It's very clear. Please go ahead. Again, sir, again.
Good evening. Namaskar to all.
Sir, कौन सर आप सुबिलानी कौन?
अमरेंद्र शुणा गली तो?
हाँ एबे सुबिला. आगे सर एबे सुबिला कौन सर?
समस्त को नमस्कार. I have been assigned the task of giving a brief outline on the chapter on agriculture. I have prepared a design which I have already shared with some people. I shall be very brief, and I have captioned the chapter like this: agriculture, then now and hereafter. In this chapter, I have designed 10 important issues. The first one is land use pattern and ownership, famines, persistence of extreme indigence, the various agrarian systems, and two very important issues I would propose in this chapter is the issue of unwilling cultivators and the issue of fallow land. Fallow land is not exactly reflected in the statistics that the government collects and the government provides. Actual size of fallow land is much larger. So this is a very important issue which I propose should be taken up. The second is the issue of cropping pattern, in which I would emphasize on persisting monoculture and the need for diversification. Diversification particularly favoring floriculture and other issues. Then in the third chapter, we would discuss factors influencing agricultural production, in which rainfall, irrigation intensity, cropping intensity, and inputs including mechanization, chemicals, credit, with special focus on labor absorption in agriculture and particularly feminization of labor, agricultural labor. This is what I would propose to be discussed in the third part. In the fourth section, emphasis is on post-harvest management, in which we should discuss procurement, storage, warehousing, then uptake by state and non-state agencies, agricultural pricing, including the issue of MSP, then value addition in agriculture, agro-processing, and agri-enterprises. And in this chapter, in this section, we should also discuss wastage of agricultural produce. So these are the things that I propose to be discussed in section 4. In section 5, I propose to have a critical review of major state initiatives in agriculture, which would focus on productivity enhancement strategies, including access to irrigation, like farm bonds, linking to farm research, etc., extension services, and fiscal and non-fiscal bills. Then the sixth section should be devoted to vegetables, fruits, and floriculture, and performance and strategies in exploring, processing, and marketing in these lines. In the seventh section, the focus is on livestock, in which we should have livestock population, meat production, meat and egg production, veterinary services, and we should explore backward and forward linkages and the role of non-state actors in the process. In section 8, we should have fisheries, in which we have fish, crab, and shrimp production for brackish water aquaculture. In section 9, we propose to have agriculture in the globalization era and response of the farmers, and then government initiatives in agriculture, livestock, and fisheries, past and present. In section 10, critical gaps and future strategy in agriculture, livestock, and fisheries, in which there should be a special subsection on linking education to agriculture. These are the issues which I propose to be discussed in the chapter on agriculture. Thank you, Amarendra, for having given me this opportunity to hear the luminaries and to present my views. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your views on the agriculture chapter. For the information of the audience, Rabi sir has already shared the written, basically the views in the written form. So I think we can directly use that for the agriculture chapter. So thank you so much, sir. Now we shall move to Professor Amalendu Jyotishi. Now, for the information of the audience, Professor Amalendu Jyotishi is working at Azim Premji University, and he is also the editor-in-chief of the newly launched Orissa Economic blog. Yeah, so now it's over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Amarendra, and good evening to everybody, and a very happy New Year. Happy Vishu Pana Sankranti to everybody. So it's a little challenging for me to what to speak. Amarendra has put almost everything else that he could think of in that particular section, I guess, in the agenda. But I thought I would focus on these three important issues, and it's not that I'm reinventing it. Quite a bit of it is already being discussed, and especially Professor Prabhat Patnaik already gave a kind of a setting to it. So these 3 points that I thought was one of the livelihood issues and the kind of dispositions that is happening. Though dispositions comes from a little more from sociological perspective, but in economics in current time, it has become a lot more relevant. And the third aspect of which is, of course, looking at a value chain based approach to see how things can be linked in a way that it works for livelihood, it works for welfare. So what has happened to Odisha, apart from the disasters, that recurring disasters that we have been seeing, is that we know that the mining related issues have created huge amount of displacement and dispositions. And it is just not that the tribal area that has been seeing those kind of issues, but we have other areas also, we have this kind of problems. And there are industrial acquisition, there are dam displacement that which had happened in the past. But in other areas, when you move on, you find different kinds of encroachment, different kinds of enclosure, where both space as well as resources has been being being encroached, or enclosure have been created. For example, shrimp culture, if you take, or the so-called new blue economy models, if you take, we have the Sagarmala projects for which we are developing new ports, new harbors, and Dhamra port and other places that have been coming up. So they are not necessarily only the kind of Western Odisha versus coastal Odisha issues, or these are not tribal areas versus non-tribal area issues. I think every part of Odisha and every part of communities have been kind of affected by this kind of large-scale projects, and these have been displacing people from their livelihood. These have been dispossessing people are having disposition of the resources that they had been using as kind of either as coastal commons or forest commons or different other kinds of pastoral or other types of commons, right? And if you extend these things to space of urban areas, you will find street vendors and others who are continuously in movement to figure out their place and identity. Right, so that's in the larger issues of disposition that I thought I will position this livelihood and how value chain possibly can play an important role. And the second thing which Professor Prabhat Patnaik already prolifically spoke about, that these large-scale capital-intensive based activities are not necessarily generating employment or for the economy, and that is becoming an important issue. But what we don't have is that we don't have sufficient amount of factual information to position to say that how these are actually spanning out. Like for example, I can give there is a PUC, there is People's Union for Civil Liberty, that they had done a study on shrimp culture in Andhra Pradesh and said that for every one job created in shrimp farm, there are 5 jobs and livelihood have been lost. So we don't know, can we do that what happens to the mining, what happens to industrial acquisition or dam displacement or the enclosure of commons in the coastal areas that is being done. With that, for every job that is being created, how much livelihood or jobs are being displaced. So that would give us a significant amount of understanding to say that whether how these large-scale activities need not necessarily be the way to look at the economic growth. So that capital can kind of give us a short-term understanding, but it essentially displaces people from their main activities. And in the process, actually, some of these people who are engaged as an entrepreneur, like say if a woman engaged in processing of fish, making dried fish and selling it, who is an entrepreneur, displaced from their entrepreneurial activities and would fend for finding a job either in Nareka or somewhere else, right? Or may remain unemployed. So those are the kind of transitions which is making, in fact, an entrepreneur into a laborer. So that is the kind of marginalization also is happening. And to add to this, the recurring natural disasters, including the pandemic, have been kind of adding to the misery essentially. And though we sometimes go a little gaga over that, Odisha's preparedness for disaster has been fantastic, and we have been kind of acclaimed by different agencies, global agencies. But this, if we look at in the long-term perspective of livelihood, I think we have not done so well. We might have arrested the immediate issues of the disaster, but not necessarily the long-term issues relating to the disaster. The kind of destruction that happens, rebuilding it takes enormous amount of time, and a good amount of its expenditure falls onto the private individuals and households, and not necessarily to state or other agencies, right? And all those things reflects on the whole aspects of poverty, food and nutrition security, which already Udaya spoke about it. But in nutrition specifically, I would bring the attention to say that we have been looking at largely from a calorific perspective, which is more of a food security dimension. But if you look at NFH's data or other data, you'll find that quite a significant portion of women are anemic. Iron deficiency is one of the important issues. Stunting has been an important issue. Wasting is an important issue. In global hunger index, India as a whole positions pretty poorly, and Odisha's situation is not significantly different from that. It is maybe worse than that. So that is what is reflecting in this kind of a dispositions. And where our strength lies, essentially, I think that is Professor Pulin Nayak and others kind of emphasized quite a bit, is that the diversity is our strength. And Dr. Mitali was also speaking about it. So we have 62 different tribes, and different tribes means tribal identity, their phonetics, language, culture, all those things that come along with that. And there, among other communities also, we have this kind of cultural diversities. Two specific one I want to kind of draw your attention, which Professor Mitali possibly missed out. One is the Dhanu Jatra of Western Odisha, particularly Bargarh, and Mughal Tamasa Bhadrak. If you bring these two aspects, because these are interfaces with the popular culture that and these are the things which have been evolving and interacting with art form with the common people. So, so these are the heritage that we have as a cultural heritage, and this is not only reflecting on culture or textile, but also it is reflecting in languages, phonetics, practices, and food. And when it comes to the resources, we have all this diversity of resources, which Dr. Saudamini already talked about, the natural resource diversity and biodiversity. But agrodiversity is another important thing, and particularly if you look at the sifting cultivation areas of southern Odisha, or even Keonjhar, northern Odisha, among Juangas in Guya or Sohras and Kondos, Porajas, you'll find that the sifting cultivation areas have been known for doing multiple crops. In my own study, I had identified 32 different varieties of crops being grown in one single plot. So, which includes cereals, pulses, and oil seeds, and varieties of other things. And we should remind ourselves that the term that rice that we use, the scientific name of it, Oryza sativa, that comes from, the origin comes from Orissa. The Oryza comes from Odisha, right? So we have been bestowed with that kind of agrodiversity, and certain kind of agricultural practices, including sifting cultivation, are at the helm of this agrodiversity. And we somehow, at some point of time, position those as the villains of ecosystems, and this needs to be understood a little more deeply to see how important this kind of diversities are. And for example, now Odisha government has initiated this program called agricultural production clusters, and that is. But if we are not mindful of this diversity, what we may happen is that we may try creating clusters which are producing homogenized product, one singular type of product, which may help the big retailers to procure these things and sell it in a bigger market in a better way, and at the same time reduce the bargaining power and because of lack of diversity among the farming community in the long run. So if we are not thinking about this diversity at this point in time, then such kind of homogenizations may lead to further dispositions among the agrarian communities too. Right. And so a design of the development vision, somewhere we have to think about it, what ought to be the development, instead of thinking in that line that we have certain ideas of development and putting it in that format. We should think what we have and how an institution that can be designed that caters to what we have to bring in better welfare to the society. Just to conclude, so I have three broad points that I would kind of like us to think and emphasize in the vision document. Wherever I don't know that we have to rethink. One is that identifying how the rights at the community level, which are in some cases non-existent or are subverted in different ways, those institutions have to be strengthened. So we know about Forest Rights Act, or somewhere we have read about Street Vendors Rights Act, but some rights are existing in paper, some rights are implemented, but there are ways of subversion that has been found out by so-called powerful. So how this can be further strengthened or further nuanced so that where rights don't exist, for example, in coastal common area, we hardly find that communities have any kind of rights on that. And you can create ports, you can create harbors, you can create ferries, and that happens through a large capital investment. And who are getting displaced from this? That possibly the small-scale fishers who used to keep their equipments, or the women who used to dry their fishes in those area, they are getting displaced from those lands. So we have to think about rights where it is non-existent, as well as guard against the kind of subversion that can be done by powerful. And second, which Professor Prabhat Patnaik has already kind of prolifically emphasized, that this specialized, capital-intensive, large-scale based economy possibly would not be the way forward to look at. So we have to focus on the diversity of products and services, which are livelihood-based, at the same time welfare-oriented. So to give an example, that how a value chain-based approach can be useful in this case, because I was also involved with the organization called World Fish, who has been working with government of Odisha towards provisioning of fish as part of ICDS program and midday meal program, where because fish has the cheap and large source of important sources of micronutrient, particularly to address anemia and zinc and other kinds of deficiencies, vitamin deficiency. So I've been working with World Fish. So one thing that we saw that while providing fish means in hinterland in a fresh form is not feasible. So it has to be somewhere in the dried or the processed form of fish that it can go to those hinterland where women and children can get the fish. But how to procure this fish? That will become a bigger question for us. Though now they are piloting it in Mayurbhanj in Kaptipada block in 2020 ICDS. We have to wait for what is the outcome of that. But when the scale it goes up, if we take it to the entire ICDS program and take it to the entire midday meal program to provide such kind of nutrition, then how to procure it? So if it has to be dried fish, who should be drying the fish? Is it the industrialized production of dried fish, or should we organize these women who have been processing this fish for a long time and procuring it from them? And from where these women get their fish, whether it is from the big trawlers who are creating havocs in the sea, or should it be from the small-scale fishers who have been catching the fish in a lot more sustainable way? So if we can put this value chain in right perspective, that if you figure out a majority of fish from small scale fishes coming through the women who are processing it and then coming to the ICDS program or midday meal program, then we can possibly have identified a value chain which is decentralized in many ways, which adds to livelihood to the people in some ways, which is ecologically a lot more responsive rather than creating havocs and disaster. At the same time, it takes care of the welfare in many meaningful way by addressing the nutrition security issues among the children and women. So similar kind of approaches are to be thought about. I think that is where we can envision Odisha and as a thought leader also and operational leader in this kind of activity. I think there is enough amount of interest in the government to take up this kind of activities. It is that we should put these ideas together in a right perspective. That's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Jyotishi. We will again have this marginalization issue that will be definitely covered. And from your discussion, I take the most important one is the rights of the communities, be it the forest dwellers, the street vendors, or the fisher community. So, yeah, thank you so much for covering different aspects across sectors. Now we shall move to Professor Nirmal Ch Sahu. Professor Sahu was basically, he's the past president of the association and he's a very respected teacher. He worked for a long time in the Barampur University. Now we'll listen to Professor Sahu regarding the structure of the vision document and also the approach that we should follow. I think Professor Sahu has already listened to all the speakers, the issues that has been raised. So what approach we should adopt so that we can cover up all the issues. Now it's over to Professor Sahu. Sir. Sir, you have to unmute first. Sir, you have to please unmute and then speak. Sir, unmute करना है आपण. Sir, please unmute. जो red button डाको. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Amarendra, for this opportunity. It's really a privilege to listen to the scholars who are really concerned about Odisha. Well, you may consult old people like us, but the vision is yours, of the younger people who will be there by 2036 and beyond. But if this is a consultation meeting, I have three things to tell. That the vision should have three components. The first one is analysis of the past. That is what we have been doing, where we are making constructive, critical appreciation and finding out the contours of a vision. This has to be an edited report, as you have said, or with chapters. Well, it would be a book. The second one really is an implementable dream. It should be of 20-30 pages, which must be implementable, which must contain our dream, the available resources. It must have a plan, a strategy, etc. Probably every chapter writer can contribute to this, and 20-30 pages we should make so that it can be easily read by the common man and the government for implementation. The third one is, if Odisha Economic Association is given the task to prepare a perspective plan, wherein we will translate the vision into practice, will we do that? You put in this requirement in the government, and probably all the scholars who have contributed can really prepare a perspective plan for 15-20 years, so that Odisha becomes, Odisha of our dream becomes the one what we desire. So the vision should have these three components, two publishable form, and the third one is a perspective plan. Well, the Odisha Economic Association may not get money, but people can contribute to that perspective plan. Let us, you really add this to your ideas so that we really prepare a perspective plan. Now, coming to the contents of the vision, well, who is the consumer of this vision? Well, you speak, you have created knowledge, I have consumed it, I have created knowledge, you consume it. Well, we enrich ourselves. How does it really matter to the people, become useful to the people, unless it goes into the government machinery? Well, so the basic component of our basic audience of our vision is the government. And in order to impress the government with our vision, well, you use the strategy of their economic survey, look at their components, their chapterization, etc., and fit the vision into that so that the government will be impressed to use it in their activities in future. The third issue that I would say is we have all probably agreed that Odisha has a rich cultural heritage. The economy has to be rich, prosperous in future. For example, if you look to the state song, Bande Utkala Janani, there is only one reference to the economic aspects, Sundara Sali Susovita Ketra. The English translation says it refers to the paddy fields, rich paddy fields of Orissa. In other words, probably around 1912, when Kantakavi wrote that song, probably the agriculturally Odisha was very prosperous. The second thing he writes is Jnana Vijnana Pradarsita Netra. This obviously is that we were really diversified. We were really having small enterprises using knowledge for economic benefit. Jnana Vijnana Pradarsita Netra. Now, if these two are symbolic of the economy that we are singing every day, Bande Utkal Janani, how far do we want to go beyond this? Beyond the development of agriculture, maybe through different activities and through development of science, knowledge, and other things. Now, how far do we want to go? And if we need to be really prosperous, how to make it inclusive, how to make it healthy, how to make it sustainable. Now, these are the issues that the vision should have. Now, in order to put to the issues of prosperity in the way that is intelligible to the government, well, you can think of development in economic sectors, development in care sectors or social sectors, as Prabhat Patnaik sir had said, environment, human development, tribal development. Well, we can use the kind of language that the government is using so that probably our knowledge could be consumed in the right kind of spirit. 2 to 3 things I find is missing in the kind of vision that we are building. Well, knowledge economy, we are thinking well, that knowledge economy can be created both in the public sector and private sector. But what is that education which improves the quality of the population? Well, quality of the population ultimately is the most sustainable kind of thing that is necessary for the future. For example, Japan today is leading the world with the better production. Is it because of science and technology, or is it because of the character of the population? It is probably the latter which is more important. If last 100 years of education hasn't given the right kind of quality of population, we need to think of a modification in that education system which will give a better character, better quality of population, which is necessary to sustain and maintain the level of development that we think. Now, the second one is the broad idea of disaster. Well, when we have this public health crisis now, well, this is also coming under disaster management. The disaster clause much as the disaster department, management department is dealing with this kind of thing. Now, therefore, the disaster is much broader than natural issues alone. It also refers to public health, and therefore, one has to really think of economics of disaster management in a much broader way. The third issue that I find with marginal differences in the works of Amalendu and Mitali Madam refers to, should we build a new Konarka temple? Should we build a new Jagannath temple? What is the economics of building these temples? Well, probably people's willingness to pay is more for this kind of activity than paying capital taxes, as Pulin and others have pointed out. People are not willing to, or people are willing to cheat rather than pay taxes, whereas people are voluntarily willing to contribute to this kind of activity. Can temple building dynamize the economy for the next 100 years? Now, remember, even Jagannath temple is now a millennium old. We should not expect that the temple will survive for all time to come. The people of Odisha probably will have to decide about a new temple. Now, what is the economics of that? Will it give employment to the people? Can we mobilize resources? Who will do that? It is not certainly government. Now, what is the meaning we have, as it is pointed out, with our architecture, with our skill, or with what Kanta Kavi referred, Jnana Vijnana Pradarsita Netra. Well, we have all talents, but should we do it? And if we do it, is it the century 2036 and beyond, so that we can have a temple? And will it really help to the economy? Will it really reduce marginalization? Will it really reduce our migration? Now, well, we need to make a study and probably make a commitment and put it in our vision, whether we should have a new Konarka temple, a new Jagannath temple, a new Lingaraj temple, maybe with our modern skill, with the traditional skill with modern technology, probably will dynamize the Odisha economy for quite some time. Well, these can be thought of in addition to what learned scholars have pointed out. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inspiring words. I think definitely your suggestions will guide us in preparing the report. And we will be in touch regularly, particularly during the regional consultations, and also the consultation will be a continuous process. Okay. So thank you so much. Now, before I open this floor for the discussion, President of the Association, Professor Surjya Tripathy, would like to make some remarks. Sir, it's over to you now.
I was listening to the deliberations of eminent academicians, and I need to briefly summarize some of the points. Professor Prabhat Patnaik, I must express thanks to him for his dynamic outlook and his vision are highlighting the prospect of developing Odisha's economy. He has candidly expressed the pragmatic prospects like decentralization in the district and at the panchayat level, and emphasizing on small industries. Massive employment technology can be massive employment generating activities can be undertaken, and that will help for the development of Odisha's economy. And his focus on care economy, prospects of educational development of the handicrafts and artisans, introducing new innovations and designs. He also explored the possibility for implementing the projects. There must not be any hindrance in the implementation part. So Professor Pulin B. Nayak, he has developed a very his deliberations in a very historic perspective regarding the unification of Odia-speaking people and the formation of Orissa state in 1936. He emphasized on poverty eradication by highlighting that Orissa is 50% of poverty, which is much more than the national level. Therefore, he uh, stressed on eradication of poverty through bringing about the harmony and mutual harmony and community harmony, which is very much essential for the development of the socio-economic of a state. Coming to Professor Udaya Mishra, he has exhaustive deliberations and focused on various practical aspects. He uh, covered plethora of issues, but significantly, Odisha's household analysis to identify the uh, disparities and deprivations, youth population, demographic dividend, social security, social protection, nutritional aspects, inequality in healthcare, facilities in Odisha, educational provisions, employment, education and occupational mismatch, and the factors that contributed for the uh, failure in the expansion of education. All these aspects have been covered by Professor Udaya Mishra more elaborately. Professor Keshab Das, he has emphasized on processing industries, how to uh, use the mineral resources in more productive way, and micro industries prospects, rethinking the development of rural economy through agro-cluster development, marketing aspect of all the industrial products, provision of the electricity to the village industries, and the entrepreneur development, development of software technology, ecotourism, value addition to different products, and integration of Orissa's economy to the global economy, and how to link the value generation at the local level, and other aspects have been dealt with Professor Das very vividly, very candidly. He has focused on these aspects. And next, Professor Saudamini Das, she has highlighted on restoration of mining areas, environmental impact of mining areas, groundwater and its extraction, drinking water, water for irrigation, land use pattern, forest right, and control of religious institutions, pollution, waste management, natural disaster, financial transfer to climate change and other aspects, and how to provide funding to all these aspects. He has very much discussed all these aspects. Then Professor Deepak Mishra, he has been working on this employment and migration since 2-3 decades, so far I know, and he is aware of the ground reality. So he presented the quality of employment aspect, working condition of labor, exclusion, disparity, marginalization of rural labor, labor-centric development, and expansion of capabilities to labor segment, circular migration, problems of distressed migration, vulnerability aspect. All these things have been addressed and emphasized on grounded analysis, the ground reality to be tackled by our document, the suggestions that should be made. Number 8, that is Professor Mitali Chinara. She has opined on to concentrate on gender issues, gender gap, and a need to incorporate in most of the chapters the issue of gender in the Odisha Vision document 2036. And she has also focused on unique and distinctive cultural aspects of Odisha, and it should find a place in the vision document. to make it complete in all aspects as he is focused. Professor Rabi Narayan Patra, he has told about the diversifying agriculture, fishery and livestock, issue of fallow land, issue of cropping pattern, post-harvest management, agro processing, productivity enhancement, strategies in agriculture. Many things he has covered how to bring about a very productive document which will give a proper roadmap for our development. Professor Amalendu has also dealt many good aspects, mainly the displacement and relocation of displaced people, their problems, large scale projection, how it is creating more unemployment in some of the instances here related, factors contributing to marginalization, issues related to poverty, elevation and livelihood, food security, and many aspects that he is also very well covered in his deliberations. He emphasized on strengthening the community right, forest right, value chain approach, all these things. Then Professor Nirmal Sahu, he has highlighted on basically three components, analysis of part of all the chapters, and we focus that we must appreciate what we have achieved and what we have done in the earlier, and how we can make an implementable aspect of the vision document. And the prospects plan or the document, if the government will allow us to have a prospective plan document, it would be better, is suggested. And overall, it is given the structure and the approach, how it's developed of the whole document. Not only two, three, many of the chapters here focused by how it can be fine-tuned and what needs to be incorporated in all the documents. So all the chapters of Vision 36 can be structured, and that has been unfolded by Professor Sahu. So overall, the commendable discussion took place, and it was very lively and learning experience to all of us. And now, most of the issues related to Odisha Vision 2036, and it's provided a good deal of feedback to prepare this vision document. So I am very much thankful to all of you for your valuable contribution and your kind presence. I hope for coming years, for coming days also will contribute in the same manner, also the same sort of cooperation to all of us. Thank you all. Now, this is open for discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for summarizing all the discussions that we had today. Now I think we can see actually so many senior people present in this meeting. May I invite Professor Kailash Saraf if he is there? I think Professor Kailash Saraf. Sir, would you like to say something? Kailash sir, are you there? Okay, then we'll invite Professor Rabi Narayan Patra, who would make some remark on the agriculture sector. Professor Mishra is working at OUAT. He teaches agricultural economics. Okay. Sir, okay, Kailash sir is there. Yeah. So, sir, please share your views. We have already gone through the time, so I would request.
Thank you. I was listening to from Prabhat Patnaik now. The two things are important. That institutions, because in economics, institutions are important. Because the framework of analysis has to be how institutions should be safe to implement all these things you are talking about. And this is because institutions are important because of two reasons. One, because in Orissa, one of the most important problems is the corruption. And if we do not agree with this, then we are ignoring the issue actually. So how institution will work in implementing all these things are very important actually. And this is one, because there should be a chapter on institutions, how institutions are will be there actually. And if you go historically, that there are top Nobel laureate, they have said where institutions are working, the development is there actually. When it is not there, it will be like that actually. This is one actually. Second thing, I agree with Professor Pulin Nayak that he talk about we talk about integration. There should be integration. That he was hinting that there should be not only peace and stability, what Kaushik Basu has been emphasizing, Amartya Sen has been emphasizing in recent debate about India, but also because that inclusiveness. Prabhat Patnaik last sentence, that the scheduled tribes, scheduled castes, they should feel that they are part of the system actually. So there will be no exclusion. These two things have to be there actually. And I have talked to professor many people also, that regional disparity has to be taken seriously. Not like just create an institution and appoint some people and give some grants. So I will just in the next round I will be talking something. I will be in touch with the people also. But three things: institutions, how to reduce corruptions, that peace and stability, and the last one is the how to have an inclusive Odisha. That is very important actually. So that the last person, what everybody, many people have talked about Gandhiji's, and Gandhiji said the last person you ask him whether he is happy, and that civil tribe, that civil caste, they should be happy. What Professor Prabhat was trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Although we have a chapter on regional disparity, but I understand your concern that, this has to be taken very seriously. Okay. Now I invite Professor Rabi Narayan Patra, who is working at OUAT, to share his views very briefly, sir. We have already overstood the time. So I request to keep your remarks within 2-3 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Amarendra. Actually, everybody has spoken well. Just I want to comment some aspects on Dr. Rabi Narayan Patra sir. Actually, he has covered all the aspects nicely. Just I wanted to highlight the first point, that diversification. Actually, it is high time to diversify from water guzzling crops like paddy to some other crops, especially in the deficit areas. And we can follow the Haryana model, where there are incentives for farmers for doing oil seed, pulses, millets, cash incentives also. So that is one point. Then second point is market orientation. Actually, what I want to say that the present FPO model, farmer producer organization model, there is now a target of covering 10,000 FPOs. Actually, those FPOs should be commodity based, cluster based. Also, I also agree with Professor Amarendra Jyotishi of that value chain based approach. Then third is also that covering all the RMCs, Regulated Market Committee, 450 RMCs under ENAM, National Agricultural Marketing, and also then organic agriculture, more focus on organic agriculture. That everybody will agree that good health is directly related to good organic food. Because all the lifestyle diseases are the reason behind all the lifestyle diseases rise there. Then next focus on technology. Even besides the GM crops and other varieties, we can also cash upon even IT-based agriculture, IT applications like artificial intelligence, IoT, drone technologies, etc. So those are certain things which I want to add what Professor Rabi Patra has told. But I also agree with Professor Patnaik on the Panchayat enterprises and the value chain model. Also on the deliberations of Udaya Mishra sir on Kuposhan Mukta Odisha. Actually, here the Odisha Millet Mission is an ideal example, which actually finds a place also in Niti Aayog report. So in that line, we can highlight how to reduce that. So these are certain points I want to highlight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for your very valuable suggestions for the agriculture sector. Okay, now that we have already exceeded time, we have already sat here for 3 long hours, in fact, more than 3 hours. So I think we should close here. May I now request Dr. Manoj Kumar Das to offer the vote of thanks, because I think the Honorable President has already summarized the points. But if you would like to make a very few important points, Manoj, you may make that, and then after that you may propose vote of thanks. And for the members who are present with all patience till now, I would request to send your suggestions by email, and in fact I would like the general email also to all the members to share their suggestions through email, so that that can all be incorporated and that can be given to the content writers. So now Dr. Manoj Kumar Das, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Association, would do the next things.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Actually, I have been assigned the responsibility to summarize the whole discussion and offer a vote of thanks. But thanks to our president, actually, he has really unburdened me to summarize the entire thing. He has nicely summarized what we have discussed over this platform. So I sincerely express my heartful thanks to our president, Professor S.N. Tripathy sir, for initially putting his remarks that what should be the scope and what should be the overall idea of the vision document. And later on, he has also nicely summarized the overall discussion. But if you look at the inputs given by our esteemed panelists, then these are the main points that I have noted actually. So far as Professor Prabhat Patnaik view is concerned, here he has nicely actually highlighted what should be there in our vision document. He has identified that we should address the unemployment issue in the vision document, and to address that he has suggested such certain things, that what should government adopt, what policy measure government can adopt, that can be elaborated in our vision document. And he talked about how the panchayat enterprise actually solve the unemployment problem in Odisha. So our vision document should talk about decentralization of enterprise. Particularly, we can focus on the rural area. Particularly, we can have panchayat enterprises. We can have also self-help groups, robust self-help groups that will solve the unemployment problem. He has also highlighted that the women labor participation actually declining drastically over the period of time. So it is a serious concern, and that should be highlighted in our vision document. And we should also address that issue, how to tackle that problem, so that inclusive development will be there, so that women will have equal say in the employment. And then he talked about that we should also talk about the care economy. And care economy means we must talk about health issues, we must talk about quality education aspects. Then he talked about, to meet all these requirements, what should be from where we'll get the resource. So he talked about the resource base. For this, he suggested that independent corporations can be built through which we can generate funds. So our vision document can speak on this, that how we can have good independent corporations which will finance different aspects like industries or infrastructure developments. They will not depend on government. They will generate their own fund, and that way Odisha can progress. So this was his remarks, and we can incorporate these views in our vision document. Then moving towards Pulin sir. Pulin sir started discussing that how Odisha actually formed in the historical context. After talking about that one, he identified that poverty is a threat uh, everywhere, and Odisha is facing that threat from a long period of time. So we need to incorporate that problem in our vision document, and we should suggest that how that poverty problem will be solved, and how we can eradicate unemployment problem from our economy. So that must occupy a significant position in the budget document. Then he talked about agricultural aspect, rural infrastructure investment, what is the requirement particularly at the to increase the agricultural productivity. So those things must be there in the vision document. He also talked about education and health, that government should drive this particular aspect. So our vision document must talk about this area, that education and health must be managed by the government, certainly not by the private sectors. Then he also talked about raising resources, how government can raise resources for all these things. He talked about capital taxes on. He also talk about that how we can bring harmony, particular political and social harmony. So that aspect must be there in our vision document. Then Udaya sir talk about different aspect, particularly he talk about trend on count and composition. Actually, he highlighted that our demographic analysis must be on household basis, not on individual specific, because the household characteristic will reveal a different story. So our demographic analysis must be household basis, not like population basis. So that must be there in the vision document. Then he talked about that how the social security and social protection measure can be taken in Odisha, that must be there in the vision document. And he also talked about health aspect, nutrition aspect, health infrastructure, regional divide. All those things must be there in the vision document. He also talked about we should give some space to understand that how nutritional progress has been taking place over the period of time in Odisha, and we should prepare one document to understand that, so that Odisha will be in a different position. Then Keshab sir, Keshab Chandra Das sir, he talked about various aspects of industrial development. He talked about IT hubs, how we can utilize those things for the betterment of Odisha. So those things must be there in the vision document. Then after Keshab sir, the next then Saudamini madam actually talk about natural resource management, and she talk about that how the climate change is actually impacting different sectors. She also about the how Odisha can utilize those natural resources that we have. So that must occupy one space in the V document. Then Professor Deepak Mishra sir, he talked about various aspects of employment, but warn us that while we are preparing the vision document, that should not be the vision of the rights. So that must be the vision document of the common man. So we should take care of that while preparing the vision document. Then Professor Mitali Chinara, he spoke about that what should be the in the vision document so far as gender and cultural aspects are concerned. She said that in all the chapters, in all the sectors, we should talk about gender aspect. That is what is happening in the context of gender, whether it is agriculture, whether it is migration, whether it is tourism, whatever may be the sector, we should link that one from the gender perspective. Then Professor Narayan Patra, he spoke on various aspects of agriculture sector. He spoke about what should included in the vision document so far as agriculture is concerned. He talked about 10 different aspects that the document is going to incorporate, starting from pattern of land use to livestock. Then Professor Amalendu Jyotishi, he actually talked about 3 important aspects that needs to be highlighted. One, identifying the rights. What are the rights that is not existing? So we have to identify those things. Then he talked about the diversification of enterprises, and the third one he gets stress is on the value chain. So these things, these 3 things must occupy space in our document. Professor Nirmal Ch Sahu sir, he spoke about that structure of our vision document. He actually highlighted 3 important aspects. He spoke about the analysis of the past. So vision document must contain this aspect, that is the analysis of past, implementable dreams within a reasonable space, that is 20 to 30 pages. Then if we are ready to have a prospective plan, we should prepare that one, and the language of that plan must be language of the government. Government will be our consumer. Government can implement those prospective plans, and our effort will be actually fruitful. So this was the overall remarks of our esteemed panelists. Then during the discussion, Saraf sir actually he talked about the importance of the institutes, that we should talk about the role of the institutions to eradicate poverty. Otherwise, all those goals we are setting, all the plans will not be actually effective. Then Mishra sir, he talked about that we can adopt the Haryana plan. Actually, that suggestion can be included in the vision document. So this was the overall discussion in this platform. So from my part and on behalf of the association, we extend hearty thanks and our gratitude. We express our gratitude all the panelists, starting from Prabhat Patnaik sir, then Pulin B Nayak sir, Udaya S sir, Keshab sir, Saudamini madam, Deepak Mishra sir, Mitali Chinara madam, Rabi Narayan Patra sir, Amalendu Jyotishi sir, Nirmal Ch Sahu sir, and our secretary also for having such a nice arrangement. We extend our thanks and gratitude all the panelists, and also we extend our thanks to all the participants, those who listen this discussion patiently over the last 3.5 hours. So thank you all for your patience and cooperation. Thank you all.